Foot-stomped calligraphy ink from Nara will set you back over $1,000. Matsusaga Wagyu from Mie Prefecture? A single cow once sold for about $330,000. And say you're in the market for a bonsai tree, well, many of those are considered priceless. Japan is full of people who've dedicated their lives to perfecting their crafts. But the skills, resources, and time needed to create goods like these don't come cheap. Here's why 20 Japanese products and delicacies are so expensive.
Japanese chef's knives are world-renowned for their unique design and durability, and just one can cost you over $900. From heating and hammering the metal, to sharpening the knife's edge and polishing the final blade. These are only a few of the skills a Japanese artisan spends a lifetime learning to master. So what makes these knives so coveted? And why are they so expensive?
作った人の魂っていうか、使った人の魂もその包丁にこもるんですね。これはうちのお母さんが使ってた包丁だというのが日本の包丁じゃないかなと思います。
Terukazu has spent 37 years crafting chef's knives at his family's factory in Echizen. Each one goes through 100 production stages. It's a process that requires over 10 years of practice.
本当に安いものですと今でもスーパーマーケットで、2000円ぐらいで売ってる包丁もあります。でも僕らの作ってる包丁はいまだに僕のおじいさんが作った包丁を研いでくれって持ってくる場合があるんです。もうびっくりしますけど、それぐらい長く使えるんですね。
Compared to popular European chef's knives, Japanese blades are lighter and sharper, allowing for more precise cuts. On the low end, most Takamura blades cost a couple $100, but custom-made pieces can sell for 15 times that. One of the most expensive knives produced by the shop sold for $6,900.
まず包丁にとって一番大事なことは、大まかに言って3つあります。まずいい材料、次に、いい焼き入れとか熱処理ですね、鍛造熱処理で、最後にいい研ぎ、この3つがないとどれ一つ欠けていても絶対いい包丁にはならない。
Takamura Hamono was one of the first knife makers to use a certain kind of stainless steel called high-speed powdered steel. It was originally designed for power tools, like saws and drills, because of its durability and strength, two qualities Japanese chef's knives are known for today. Once the metal is cut, it's heated in an electric oven to harden and strengthen the blade. Then the hammering begins. At this point, the artisan relies on experience and instinct to guide them in producing a blade of ideal strength and thinness. Hammering leaves behind circular indents, something knife makers in the past typically polished away. But 60 years ago, Terukazu's father and his colleagues discovered the benefit of knives with a textured surface like this.
さっきみたいに鍛造トントントントントンとしてもう表面結構デコボコになりますよね。でそのままではダメなんできれいに磨いて、普通はきれいに焼き入れをしてで、研いで磨いて、その方が物がくっつかなかったと。じゃがいもであるとか人参であるとかピタッとくっついてなかなか取れないのに、デコボコだったらポロポロポロポロ取れると。
This hammered finish, called tuchime, allowed chefs to chop ingredients quickly and more efficiently. It also added a beautiful aesthetic to each blade, another element highly valued in Japanese knives.
今世界中でも土目の入った包丁ってやってますよね。
But a Japanese chef's knife wouldn't be nearly as valuable without a supremely sharp edge. An artisan presses the blade against a rough grindstone made of natural rock, a sharpening material you'll only see used in Japan. This step distinguishes an artisan's skill and ultimately sets a knife's final value.
手にかかる微妙な力とあと音と感覚で研いでいくんですけども、そこは一丁ずつやっぱり違ってくるし、砥石の状態も一丁研いだら変わってくるんですね。一丁ずつ変わってくる。叩き3年、叩きっていうんですね、作業、こっちの手で叩く、叩き3年で研ぎはまあ一生、まあずっと勉強だと。
It takes one full day to sharpen the blade and another full day to secure and polish the handle. The final knife is totally unique, each with its own distinct balance, thickness, and design.
あと包丁って自分の料理人の方がよく言うんですけど、自分の手の延長になってほしい。でそのためにやっぱりそういった工夫ですかね。やっぱりまずバランスがもう自分のここの一番包丁の先端が自分がどこを当てたいかと、当てたいところにマット持っていけると、指の先のような扱いができる包丁。
Several of the world's best chefs use Takamura's knives, from Rene Redzepi at Noma to Massimo Bottura at Osteria Francescana. Another one of those chefs is Masakazu Fuji. He uses Takamura's knives to prepare fish at his restaurant in Fuku.
まあおそらくアーティストのライブでメインのギターがなんだとかっていう風になっても、サブであったり、ギターテックがいたりしてやる人間っていうのは、演奏する人間っていうのはそれに集中できる。でそれを高村さんが今してくれているっていうような感じですね。この切ったところから表面に光沢が出てる。でこれって切れない包丁でやったら全くこういうのは出てこない。でそれをストレスなく切ると、こういう感じで切ったところから今にももう溢れようとする。でも止まってる。でそれを口の中で歯で噛んだら出る。
Echizen has been the center of high-quality knife making since blacksmiths began crafting chef's knives here 700 years ago. And today the city is internationally recognized for its cutlery production. But before knives, artisans made swords, another valuable trade in Japanese culture.
ところが日本の刀って細いですよね。なぜ折れないかっていうと、真ん中に柔らかい鉄が入ってるんです。そして外側に硬い鋼で覆っていると、二重構造になってるんで折れないんですね。で、日本の包丁はその、技術を生かして真ん中に鋼を入れて両側から柔らかい鉄でくるむ。
Despite dedicating decades to this craft, Terukazu and his brothers weren't always set on becoming master knife makers.
弟もその一番下の弟も3人ともこの仕事をやってるんですけども、この仕事をやりたいとか、これ僕なんかだったらロック歌手になりたいとか、弟だったらオートバイのレーサーになりたいとか、やっぱり、ある程度の年代が来て本当に自分の今までの僕が育ってきたこの背景とか、そういったあと自分がうちが作ってるこの包丁とかをこう見ていくと、やっぱり俺はこれをやるべきなんやな、これをやらなあかんのやなというのと、やっぱこれをやりたいなという気持ちがやっぱり出てくるので。
Professional chef or not, getting your hands on one of Takamura's knives could take years. With that kind of wait time, coupled with the decades of training required to master this craft, It's likely these pieces will remain costly for years to come.
そうですね、やっぱり、本当にこういう価値のある、もちろん時間もかかるわけですから、まあ本当に申し訳ないんですけども、やっぱり、2年半とかそれくらい待っていただいた方も、おられます。でもやっぱり使って本当にそれができた時に、ああ待っててよかったと、もうこれ使ったら他の包丁はもう全然使えないとか、まあ本当に嬉しいことですけど。
This is ink. Toshitsugu Okabe is kneading it until it's as soft as a rice cake. It's imperative for him to be as thorough as possible because a well-kneaded mixture becomes high-quality calligraphy ink. It takes at least 4 years of aging before these solid ink sticks can be sold, and even longer for the most expensive ones. A 200-gram high-grade ink stick from this producer, Kobayen, costs over $1,000, and for some other brands, prices can reach almost $2,000. Meanwhile, almost double the amount of commercial liquid India ink can go for less than $9. So why are solid ink sticks so sought after? And why are they so expensive? It's January in Japan's Nara Prefecture. Ink producer Kobayen has been making Japanese calligraphy ink for 450 years. This type of ink, also known as sumi, is traditionally sold in the form of handmade solid ink sticks. To use the dry ink stick, calligraphers rub it on an inkstone to mix it with water. Sumi ink is typically black, but it can also be tinted brown or blue. The ingredients are simple: soot, animal glue, and perfume. But the quality of these materials and the time-intensive techniques required to collect and process them have a large impact on the final price. It starts in this room, lit by 100 oil lamps. This workshop has 4 rooms like this, where artisans produce all the soot they require to make ink. 2 workers are in charge of this stage, each overseeing 2 rooms and 200 oil lamps. They carefully manage the vegetable oil in the lamps and gradually collect soot throughout the day. In Japan, this process is called catching smoke. Every day, artisans light all 400 lamps and cover each with a lid, the underside of which collects soot as the oil burns. But they can't just leave the lid in the same place for hours, because overheating it will prevent soot from accumulating. The flame must be off-center, and the artisans must rotate the lid every 20 minutes for 2 hours. The artisans scrape the soot off the top of the lid. They replenish the oil, and the process starts all over, for a total of 5 times a day for each lamp. These lamps contain rapeseed oil, the most common choice when producing high-grade ink sticks. Ink sticks made of soot from even more expensive oils like paulownia, camellia, or sesame can easily cost up to 4 times as much. But artisans must also consider other details, like the containers that hold the oil and the material of the wick. To ensure the quality of the soot, they use non-porous earthenware containers. Craftspeople in this workshop even weave the wicks themselves to exacting specifications.
非常に細い芯で小さな炎で炊き上げると、おのずとそこで作り上げるすすの方も非常に粒子の細かなものになってくれるわけなんですよ。やはり非常に紙の中に深く食い込んでくれるという、そういう側面があるもんですから、粒子の細かなすすで作り上げた墨の方が非常に色も立体感のある非常に鮮やかな黒色を発色してくれますので。
The fineness of the soot grains determines the final price. Then there's the binding agent, animal glue. Unlike most of its modern liquid ink counterparts, which use shellac, sumi ink typically uses cattle glue. For the most expensive ink sticks, artisans sometimes mix in other types of glue, such as donkey, deer, and goat. Corbayen says this improves the ink's glossiness and texture. The company buys glue specially made for sumi ink, which comes in a dry board-like form. Artisans dissolve it by mixing it with 70 degrees Celsius water, which takes over an hour and a half. According to Corbayen, dissolving the glue slowly at a low temperature is key to producing quality ink.
非常に穏やかなくっつき合いになってくると。そこにニカワというのが介在してくれるおかげで、細かな話ですけど、ニカワの分子が細かなすすの分子をくるんでくれてるわけですね。ですからすずりの上で吸っていくと非常にスムーズに液体になってくる。
But animal glue can have a bad smell, so sumi ink makers add fragrance like borneol and musk to counteract it.
で香料を入れるというのはむしろ今はその気持ちを落ち着けるということの作用の方が非常に大きな役割を果たしてくれていると思いますね。
The next step is to knead the soot, glue and fragrance into a soft dough. The dough is kneaded every morning, by hand and foot. Doshitsugu takes care to knead it thoroughly, so the soot and glue are evenly distributed. That way, the solid stick can eventually dissolve into homogeneous liquid ink. Once he's properly kneaded the dough, Doshitsugu cuts it into balls and weighs them for consistency. Then he places the balls into molds and uses a machine to press them into shape. Improperly kneaded dough results in ink sticks that don't produce rich colour.
中がなんていうんですか、しっかり揉まれている状態ですぐ型に入れないと、あんまり、時間かけると外側だけカピカピになって、なんていうんですか、干からびて中がちゃんと揉めてないっていう状態になってしまうんでね。それでもちょっと急がないといけないですね。
Corbayen makes about 6,000 of its smallest, highest quality ink sticks a month. It employs a handful of artisans for this, and the ones tasked with kneading require the most experience. It takes 5 years to train as a sumi ink craftsperson, but 10 years before they're allowed to make high quality ink. Corbayen produces almost 40,000 of its smallest sumi ink sticks between October and April, when the cooler weather of winter ensures the glue can harden during shaping. But the work isn't done yet. Drying the ink sticks too quickly will cause them to crack, making them unsellable. So artisans rely on a traditional technique using oak ash to slowly absorb moisture from the sticks over a long period of time. They start by covering the sticks in moist ashes. Each day, they swap yesterday's ashes with drier ones. They repeat this process for up to 40 days until the ink sticks are about 70% dry. After, they hang the sticks with straw and air dry them in-house for up to 6 months. Properly drying and maturing an ink stick takes at least 4 years. The longer the sticks dry and age, the better they perform and the more expensive they become. Corbayen itself has ink sticks that are hundreds of years old.
一般的にその人間の人生というかね、そういったものの年代に重ね合わせて説明されることもありますけど今おっしゃったように非常に古くなれば古くなるほどということは言えると思いますね。百貨店さんですとかその専門店さんで販売されているその日本の墨にしても中国の古い墨にしてもね、やっぱりそうですね、数百万100万200万のものも拝見したことはございますし。
Finally, artisans polish them and apply the finishing touches. Now they're ready to be sold to calligraphers like Sho Azakami. Calligraphers like Shou traditionally prefer ink sticks to liquid ink. But in order to write with a Sumi ink stick, he must first transform it into a liquid. This requires an inkstone and water. Shou adds a small amount of water and rubs the ink stick on the stone, breaking it apart. He mixes the two to make the liquid ink, adding more water or more dry ink until he gets the consistency he needs.
することで心を落ち着かせる、書く前の準備段階ということで、墨をすることで心を落ち着かせ、書に集中するというふうに思っております。吸って書くっていうことで、書き心地も全然違いますし、やはり固形木の良さっていうのを、しっかりと分かった上で吸って使っています。
But not all Sumi inks provide him with the same writing experience.
そうですね、書き心地に関してはやはり墨の粒子の質であったりっていうので、滑らかさであったり墨の伸びであったりっていうのはもちろん違います。書いた後の黒の質っていうのもやはり質のいいものの方が黒の深みであったり、そういうものがよく現れますね。
95% of Japan's Sumi ink is made here, in Nara Prefecture. Sumi ink production in Japan is said to have begun in the 7th century, when Chinese ink-making methods were introduced by monks. By the 14th century, Sumi ink use was flourishing in Japan. Though its primary use is for calligraphy, it's also often used for ink paintings, known as sumie. And because Kobayen must age its ink sticks for several years before it can sell them, consistent production is necessary, or else its supply won't meet the demand. But that doesn't mean the company wants to ramp up its production.
けどもその効率を重視してでものを作るというのは大事なことなんでしょうけども、効率だけではどうしても昔ながらのいいものが作れないというのが。
Kobayen strives to continue making calligraphy ink using the same techniques and of the same quality as its founders.
それを一つの目標として掲げていると非常に手間がかかって、例えばロスがあったとしてもそれを続けていくというのが一番大事な会社の目標となっていると考えてるんですけど。
The fat in this Matsusaka Wagyu is so soft, it melts as soon as you touch it.
Dès que j'ai mis dans ma bouche, ça fond directement.
The finest cuts of Matsusaka Wagyu have a melting point of 12 degrees Celsius. That's 8 degrees less than Kobe. And while prices for fine diners in Tokyo have never been low, for the first time, this beef is being sold outside of Japan, in Paris, where just 100 grams sells for $530. These cows are so valuable that in 2002, one fetched 50 million yen, over $330,000 at auction. To reach that low melting point, farmers in Matsusaka painstakingly raise these cows and keep them alive longer than their average lifespan with modern and ancient practices. So how do you raise the most expensive beef in the world? And why is Matsusaka Wagyu so expensive?
これが伊藤牧場の、サーロインです。月齢は、40ヶ月のサーロインですので。
Hiroki Ito is a third-generation Matsusaka Wagyu farmer. On his farm in Tsu, Mie Prefecture, you will find only virgin female cows. It's the primary requirement for any of the 80 Matsusaka Wagyu farms here in the Mie Prefecture.
オスよりもメスの方が、味も美味しいですし、柔らかさもメスの方が柔らかいです。匂いでいうと香りがいいですし、味でいうと甘い味ですし、柔らかさでいうと口の中に入れたらとろけると。
Matsusaka beef has long been praised for its extremely low melting point, which is half that of other types of Wagyu. This means that when cooking, the fat melts in a shorter time.
融点が低いのでちょっと溶けてきていますけど、この融点もこの指で触ると分かるようにこうスッとへっこんでいきますね。融点が低いと滑るんですよ。この光っとるように手もね滑ります。
To reach this intense marbling, old generations of farmers like Hideo, Hiroki's dad, used to feed cows with beer.
昔は食体を起こした牛、食が落ちてきた牛に1代目の正和が与えてまして、それを僕は若い折に一緒に手伝って当時関わって飲ましたことはあります。普通の一般の元は昔はキリンビールとかそういうので普通一般的な銘柄はありません。僕が宿農しましたのが25歳の時でございますから、今73歳でございます。誰がビールを飲ましとるっていうのは、まず私は今はもうなくなったと思ってるんですけど。
Although there's no evidence that this practice increases a cow's appetite, many associate Matsusaka Wagyu with it. The fact that Matsusaka has kept a relatively low profile internationally has almost transformed this practice into a legend.
やっぱりそんなに好きじゃなさそうだったんですけど、どうなんですか？口から飲むっていうのを強制的にやっとるもんで、多分飲んでからあとはほろほろ酔いながら食欲増してると思います。
Hiroki doesn't practice this anymore. Instead, he has perfected the feed and is practicing circular agriculture.
そしてそこから取れたお米から取れる稲わらです。胃の中を整える役割で最初にこのわらは食べさせます。この後、濃厚飼料を与えます。ふすま麦、大豆かすトウモロコシと配合されていまして、そして濃厚飼料は肉をつけるためですね。牛を大きくするのに与えるのが濃厚飼料です。
The cost of feed is an important factor that drives the prices up. To reach that soft marbling, Matsusaka cows need to eat a lot. They also need to eat for a much longer time than other cows.
1.5 倍ぐらいはかかっています。
Matsusaka cows are raised for 30 to 32 months, 6 months longer than other Japanese black cattle. Everything adds up over time for Hiroki. The costs of feeding, temperature control, air circulation, and cleaning the enclosures regularly to avoid flies.
100万で子牛を仕入れたら、そこから肥育で100万円経費がかかりますので、200万円かかっているということになります。
Farmers here call this raising period fattening. For the first 3 to 4 months, cattle eat grass to develop a strong digestive system. This is called the belly creation period. Then comes the finishing period, where cattle gradually switch to concentrated feed and rice straw to fatten up. Hiroki is now experimenting with even longer periods of fattening, raising his cattle from 35 up to 40 months. But raising cows for such a long time can also be dangerous for Hiroki, as a cow could get sick and die.
その長期肥育をしている間に当然牛の寿命というのがありますから、肥育期間が長いと当然人間でも一緒ですが、病気になったり、食欲不振になったり、あと体幹の温度が感じにくくなったりと。でやっぱり長期肥育というのはいろんな面で体に負担がかかってしまいます。
A cow at the end of its fattening period is a true treasure. Every year, Matsusaka cows get auctioned off and one gets crowned Queen of Matsusaka. While the highest ever price for one of these cows was 50 million yen in 2002, this auction has never really seen a low price, averaging around 20 million yen. Events like the auction have also fostered another legend, that farmers in Matsusaka massage their cows with alcohol. This time, it is not to improve their appetite, but their appearance.
うちはその生体の予選会で通った牛だけやります。生体の外から見る優勝を競う牛については必ずそういう掃除をしてきれいに出さなあかんっていうことやもんで、けどもうちの牧場は清めとしてやる。はい、こするとこういう形になってド派手に見せたいもの。ビールよかはやられてる方の方が多いと思います。
It's not just adult cows that cost a lot. Calves can be very expensive.
この子牛は、約100万ぐらいです。
Hiroki doesn't raise his cattle from birth. At 10 months old, calves are also sold at auctions throughout Japan. Hiroki spends almost half of his time at work buying calves, and he's very demanding.
まずは、顔を見ます。そして額が広い眉間といいますかね、額が広い牛は口が大きいので餌も食い込みもいいということで、あと角も綺麗な角を整っとる牛をまず見まして、その次に後ろから、お尻の方を見て尻尾の上がり下がりとか、体格とか、全体的にしっかりした肥育できる牛を選びます。この子牛は抜群に最高級の BMS12 が私の中ではもう確定しています。
BMS12 is the highest marbling grade for Wagyu in Japan. The more intense the marbling, the higher the price. For customers in Tokyo, 100 grams of sirloin costs 10,000 yen, but that's still much less than what Parisians are paying at Mariaganea, where the same cut is sold at 360 euros. The most premium cut, tenderloin, sells for 5,000 euros per kilogramme.
Comme on a bien respecté la température, le melting point c'est très bon. Dès que j'ai mis dans ma bouche, ça fond directement. Donc comme on a la chaleur naturelle de la bouche, donc ça aide à atteindre la température qu'on a besoin. Donc ça prend secondes. C'est pas ma première fois de goûter ça, mais chaque fois que je goûte, j'ai rien à dire.
The Paris restaurant was the first to successfully export Matsusaka Wagyu out of Japan and include it on its menu. Its most expensive tasting menu costs 520 euros. Matsusaka Wagyu is heavily regulated. To include Matsusaka beef on the menu, the restaurant had to follow strict rules. The Paris restaurant needed to apply for a license, which took a year to be accredited. To maintain it, the restaurant needs to have a high rating on Google Maps, and there can't be another restaurant serving Matsusaka Wagyu within an 840-meter radius. As of 2023, Hiroki has shipped only 3 cows to Mariaganea. Due to this limited supply, the 520 euro menu with Ito Ranch's premium tenderloin is served to only 1 table per day. This exclusivity is set to get a little bit looser. In the last 10 years, Japan has been a major importer of US beef, importing an average of $1.83 billion a year. Meanwhile, millions worth of Wagyu made the opposite journey as it reached international fame. A decline in tourism after the COVID-19 outbreak and a change in consumer behaviour toward cheaper meats exacerbated this. And now, Japanese cattle farmers are looking outside the country's borders. The export quota for Matsusaka has jumped from 24 in 2022 to 700 in 2024. Of those, it's the most premium cuts that are exported, going to high-end restaurants like Mariaganea in Paris. This is pushing farmers who want to ship abroad to bet on those lucrative but dangerous long fattening periods.
45ヶ月と、私も初めに世界初この45ヶ月で出すっていうのは生まれた。
This is Kenji. He's using a centuries-old technique to dye silk for a kimono. It's physically demanding, but that's not the only challenge. He has to match this colour exactly, making adjustments by eye. And it's essential that the fabric inside this barrel remains white. Kenji won't know if he's successful until he opens the lid. This is one of over 20 steps required to make a kimono. You can buy a cotton kimono for $300, but a handmade Chiso kimono can cost over $10,000. And the company's most expensive kimonos cost 10 times that. We followed 10 artisans, step by step, to find out what makes these kimonos so expensive. Versions of the kimono have been worn for centuries. Today, the kimono is viewed as formal wear, worn on special occasions like weddings or coming-of-age ceremonies. Part of the reason why Chiso's kimonos are so expensive is that they're made entirely out of silk. It takes around 12 meters of silk to make a single kimono. Chiso collaborates with a network of highly skilled artisans. Each step is done by hand and can take weeks to complete. This intricate design starts out as a simple sketch.
はじめだいたいこんな小さいやつで描いて、でこの大きくして、これ下当たりするのに1日ぐらいですかね。でもこれをきれいに描き直そう思ったらやっぱり1週間は絶対かかる、10日ぐらい。これなんか細かいから結構かかりますね。
Once the design is ready, Hiroshi transfers it to the silk. This step is called drafting, and it can take up to 2 weeks. Hiroshi ensures that the design looks good when the kimono is worn, not just on a flat surface. These lines are critical to the design process, but you won't see them on the finished kimono. This paint is washed away after acting as a guide for other artisans. Hiroshi has 37 years of experience, but he's still very critical of his work.
必ず描き上がってからやっぱりあそこはしといたらこうしといたらっていうのがたくさん出てくるもんで、仕事なんでね、時間的なもんもありますんで、で何十時間かけて家言うんやったらそら何回もそれこそ自己満足でね。
Chiso's kimonos are known for their complex patterns, painted using a technique called yuzen. Artisans trace the design with a glue-like paste that separates colours when the silk is painted. It also gives a characteristic white outline to parts of the design.
なのでその線で描いたところは最終的に染まらずに生地の白色が出てくるので、その輪郭線っていうのは白色になります。
It's patient work, but Ai says it's all worth it when she sees the finished kimono.
私はもともと中学生ぐらいの時からこういう着物を作る職人になりたいなと思って京都に出てきたんですけれど、やっぱり根気はすごくいりますし、やっぱ座りっぱなしなのでちょっと肩が凝ってきたりとかもあるんですけど、根気さえあればっていうところはあります。とあとはやっぱり綺麗に仕上がった時とかはすごく嬉しいです。
This is just the start of a months-long process. Pieces of the kimono are sent off to different artisans across Kyoto. Each artisan must perfect their section while keeping in mind the final design. At Yoko's workshop, she dyes the base of the kimono with these large brushes.
とりあえず早く動かすっていうのが刷毛ムラいかないコツですし、着物を染めようと思ったら仕立てた時に全部の濃度が一緒になってるってことは同じリズムで全部いくっていうことなんですね。
Yoko and her assistant blend the edges, working around the design. But this isn't the only way kimonos are dyed. Some are dyed using a technique called shibori, which creates bold colours and distinct shapes. But it's very tedious work. Before Kenji starts working, artisans sew up the silk and bind this barrel.
子供自分からね、 稽古して、教えてもらってやってるんです。ですから何十年ってなりますけどね。
The seam Hiromi is sewing forms the edge of the design. Then, Matsuyama wraps the silk along this wooden tub and tacks it into place before he attaches the lid. This step is key to preventing dye from bleeding inside. Now, it's time for Kenji to dip the silk. He works quickly but constantly monitors the silk to ensure it's dyed correctly. If the barrel remains in the dye for too long, the colours will start to bleed. Kenji cuts a strip of fabric, compares it to the swatch, and adjusts its dye accordingly.
染屋によってみんな違いますけど、男の場合は反対色で先させていくから、入れすぎたらものすごく効くんです。反対色やから。
After the dyeing is complete, Kenji lifts the lid and examines his work. All of these steps combine to tell a story through the design of the kimono. Themes of nature or the seasons are common, while some designs reference poems or plays. One of the most skilled and delicate steps is the yuzen dyeing. Tomoko has 25 years of experience making kimonos.
具体的にどのような色をこの着物だったらどのようなイメージを膨らませてどのような色にしていくかっていうだいたい具体的な色を拾っていきます。
Yuzen dyeing has been practiced for centuries and has become an iconic feature of high-end kimonos. The technique is more expensive and time-consuming than screen printing, but Chiso's customers are willing to pay a premium for the result. Long-sleeved kimonos with complicated designs can take 2 to 3 weeks to paint.
自分で合わせた色を全部一つ一つここにテストをしてで記録として残しておくものです。でこれを見て次にこれを合わすには大体どうしたらいいかっていうのはもう入ってるっていうことです。数字にはできないので技術的に難しいものはやはり写実調のいわゆる自然のままのような花でありますとか草花紋っていうのの
The final step in the process is for artisans to apply gold leaf and embroider complex designs. Embroidery alone can take weeks to months depending on the design. The more embroidery a kimono has, the more expensive it will be. When all the pieces fall into place, the finished kimono is a work of art, a testament to the skill of each artisan who has worked on the silk.
着物一着作るのにだいたい20名ぐらいの人が関わってます。その手仕事のやっぱり良さ、細部であったり、それぞれの工程の非常に高い技術が要求されまして、それはやっぱり機械ではなかなかできない本当に細部の美しさであったり、こういった展示をするときに、柄がしっかり見えやすいように仮縫いを行っているという状態が、販売されている状態ですね。まずお客様の寸法を採寸をしてである程度は規定の寸法でお仕立てはするんですね。
Chiso's kimonos take 6 to 12 months to make, and those hundreds of hours of labour are reflected in the price. Most range from $7,000 to $14,000, but some of Chiso's elaborate designs cost over $100,000. And the accessories traditionally worn with a kimono increase the price even more.
で、お着物がなぜ高くなるかっていうことなんですけれども、いかに職人が どれだけ手を加えたかっていう、それは友禅の細かさであったり、もちろん分量も関係してきますし。
Customers looking for less expensive kimonos might choose to rent or to buy refurbished ones, which usually cost a few $100s, but still provide good quality. Buying a cotton kimono, or one without complex yuzen, is much more affordable. These kimonos are often worn for less formal events. But current demand for expensive, complex kimonos is low. Kimono sales declined dramatically in the 90s during Japan's economic crash, and the industry has continued to shrink. Today, it's around 14% of the size it was in 1975. Shiso sells around 4,000 kimonos each year, but the relevance of the garment in modern life is limited.
両極だと思うんですけど、いやもう全く関心がないわっていう方と、やっぱりちょっと着物に、やっぱ日本人だから着物に目覚めてきたっていう方と。
Further complicating matters, the artisans it relies upon to maintain production are getting older.
で、やっぱり伝統的な技術はやっぱり職人の技術力が高いっていうことが条件なんですが、だいたい職人さん今で60代とか70代の方たくさんいらっしゃるんで、30年以上仕事していただいている方が多いと思います。今新しい職人さんを見つけるのはやっぱりそういう職人の仕事をやりたいっていうそういう若い方もいらっしゃいますんで、ただ全体的には職人の数はやっぱり減っていってますね。
The future of this centuries-old clothing tradition depends on the skill of the artisans who practice it.
Japanese sword making is a tradition that goes back centuries, and one that's carried on to this day. Each sword requires dedication, skill, and can take over 18 months to create. The resulting blades can be worth thousands of dollars. So what makes them so expensive?
So 世界中に鉄器があってナイフ刀剣の文化はあるわけです。ですがこの、焼きを入れたその鋼をきれいに磨き上げてその鉄を鑑賞するという文化があるのは日本独自のものなんですね。
Master Akihira has been making swords for 21 years. He was inspired by a sword crafted by the legendary 13th century swordsmith Masamune, and after a 5-year apprenticeship and years of training, he became one of the 180 swordsmiths working across Japan. Japanese swords have always been more than just weapons. They were artworks, status symbols, and throughout history held a huge spiritual importance.
日本では古くからですね、このように美しく磨き上げられた刀身、鋼には魔を打ち払う力があると信じられてきたんです。そういうようなものを打ち払う力が刀にあると考えて、刀を非常に大切にしたし、それを身につけることによってよこしまなものから身を守ろうとしたんです。決してこれがね、戦いの道具として日本人と共にあったというわけではないんですよ。現在では確かに美術品として我々刀鍛冶は作っているわけですけども、やはり非常によく切れるように作られていますし、もしいざという時があるならば、武士が命を懸けられるだけのものに私は作っているつもりですから。今の現代の私たちの刀鍛冶がこういった刀を作っている理由というのも、やはり絵を楽しまれる、絵を鑑賞して楽しまれる方がいるように、刀をコレクションして楽しまれる方がいるんですね。そういう方のために作ることもあるし、あるいは、子供ができた、あるいはお孫さんができた、娘がお嫁に行く、そういった場合のお守り刀として作ってほしいということで、こうやって刀を
Each sword is a unique artwork, and one that is made to be admired as you would a painting. As sheets of steel are folded into each other again and again, wood grain-like patterns form, and these patterns, coupled with the skill of the swordmaster, create a completely unique blade.
なぜこうやって姿を見るかというと、私たち刀の仕事をしている人間、あるいは刀の好きな人間からすると、まず刀の姿を見ると、古い刀であればその刀が作られた時代が分かりますし、現代のものであればその作家がどういう時代のものを狙って作ったかなという、作為が分かります。
Knowing what to look for in each sword is important. Characteristics like the angle and length of the blade, or the way the metal is folded, could give away the era in which it was made, and even who made it.
切っ先の部分というのが、いろんな直線曲線が集まる場所でもあって、ここは刀鍛冶の腕の見せ所でもあるし、その刀を研いだ研ぎ師さんの腕の見せ所でもあります。だから僕らはこういうところを見て、この刀鍛冶はうまいなとか、あるいはこの研ぎ師さんはうまいななんてことを思うわけです。またこの、そうですね、刃縁、この白い刃文の上の方、この境目のあたりにはですね、そうですね、まるでこう星を散らしたようなこうキラキラした粒が見えてくると思うんです。
Looking at the months of work that go into creating each blade, it's easy to see why these swords command such a high price. And as there are less and less sword masters across Japan, these works of art are only going to become more valuable.
作品として常に最高のものを作らなくてはいけないという責任感と使命感のようなものがあります。それは一つには僕のプライドをかけて常にいいものを作らなくてはいけないという気持ちです。その中にはですね、僕の刀を持つ人に喜んでもらいたいということもあるけれど、もう一つは1000年経ってその1000年後の人が僕の刀を見た時にいい作品だなと言ってくれる、そういうものを作りたい。
This is the most expensive fish in Japan. In January 2018, a kilogram of these baby eels cost around $35,000. That's more than bluefin tuna, and almost as much as the price of gold at the time. But catching these eels is just the beginning. It can take a year of work until they're large enough to be sold. So what makes these eels so popular? And why are they so expensive? People in Japan have eaten eel for thousands of years. Restaurants like this can sell 40 to 50 tons of eel each year. Japanese eel, or Anguilla japonica, can be found across East Asia. But overfishing and changing habitats have caused a huge decline in eel populations. Since 1980, the global catch of eel has declined by more than 75%, which has had a huge effect on price.
近年はとにかくその一年一年のうなぎの仕入れの価格差が非常にすごくて、平気で去年の3倍、また来年3分の1。
Unlike other types of fishing, the majority of eels are raised, not caught as adults. Young eels called glass eels are caught in the wild and raised on farms like this. No farms have been able to efficiently breed the eels in captivity, so farmers depend on the catch of young eels to make a profit.
ですね、この1年で育てている量は、年によっても違いますけど、だいたい30トンぐらいですね。15万匹か16万匹ぐらいです。
Raising this many eels requires constant attention. Michio has been working as an eel farmer for almost 40 years.
うなぎの養殖に関してですけども、うなぎは決して強いとは思いませんし、何かそういった病気とか事故とかトラブルがあったらもう本当に 90% 以上のブドウマリ率は維持できません。そういった管理、日々の管理というのが非常に重要になってきています。
After the cost of the eels themselves, feeding them is the most expensive part. 2 to 3 times a day, workers feed eels this. It's a mixture of fish meal, wheat, soybean meal, and fish oil.
15万匹確実に食べてくれるように努力しながら小さいうちに食べさせるっていうところが難しいですね。最初はそこから始まりますので、その時期は非常に気を使いますね。もうその一つの池が何か事故とか何かあればもう全部終わってしまいますので。
After 6 to 12 months of work, eels are big enough to be sold. Workers unload the eels and sort them by size to determine where they'll be sold. Experienced workers can quickly tell the difference just by feel. Some of these eels will end up at restaurants like Serugaya, which has been serving eel for over 150 years. That high demand is part of the reason young eels are so expensive. The final dish is called kabayaki. It may look simple, but preparing it takes years to master.
うなぎのことわざっていうのがありまして、よく言われるのは串打ち3年、裂き8年、焼きは一生。
Workers prepare eel live to maintain freshness, but this makes handling much more difficult. Workers remove the bones and cut eels to the proper size for the skewers.
焼きは一生、一生っていうことは要するに死ぬまでかかるってことですけれども。
Eel has to be constantly monitored while it's cooking to achieve even grilling.
やはり硬すぎず、柔らかすぎず。
Chefs steam, then grill each eel 3 times, dipping it into sauce between each grilling.
実際の食べる美味しさ、それを両立させるっていうことが蓋を開けた時の見栄えが美しい。
Kabayaki presented in a lacquer box with rice is called unaju. It can cost up to $91 depending on the price of adult eel. If prices are too high, restaurants struggle to make a profit.
うなぎの資源量に関してはやはり我々うなぎ屋さんみんな死活問題ですから非常にそれは皆さん考えていると思います。僕も当然そうですし。
In Japan, eels are eaten year-round, but consumption peaks in the summer, and it's become a big part of some local economies. But the high demand has caused concern. In 2014, Japanese eels were classified as endangered. And because of low domestic catch, the majority of eels eaten in Japan are imported from China and Taiwan.
やはり必要量よりも少ないと高騰してくる。高騰してきた時に生産者が、どういうふうな利益というをそれのバランスをどう取っていくかというのが非常に課題が大きいということになっています今。
There have been efforts to improve the eel population, like regulating fishing, releasing adult eels back into the water, and researching how to hatch eels in farms. But the future of Japanese eels remains unclear, and the price is likely to increase with demand.
Bonsai is an art form that requires years of training and centuries of dedication. At the 2012 International Bonsai Convention, a tree was on sale for 100 million yen, just under $1 million. And many more of these trees are considered completely priceless. So what is it that makes bonsai so expensive? Bonsai is the art of dwarfing a regular tree to create a perfect miniature representation of nature in a small pot. It has a long history. Originating in China, the practice of creating tiny trees and landscapes appeared as far back as the 6th century. The tree's growth is restricted by years of pruning, wiring, repotting and grafting, and the plants need to be checked on and often watered every day. The skills required to grow these trees plays a huge part in their value. They are often bent and twisted into shape, positioned around rocks, or even placed with other trees to simulate a tiny forest. Many of these techniques require years to master, and any errors made can result in permanently ruining the shape, or even killing a plant that has been growing for centuries. Chiako Yamamoto is a fourth-generation bonsai master based in central Japan. She's been creating and selling bonsai for the last 51 years, and one of the hardest skills to master when growing these plants is patience.
でこれがこうなってきます。でこれがそうですね。15年ぐらい経ってこれが15年ぐらい経ってできたものですね。ここら辺が、古い木ですね。こういうのが25年ぐらいそれからこういうふうになって作って。やっぱり絵だとかそういうのはもう完成したらそこからは何も変わっていかない。でも盆栽は変わっていくんですよね。それは自分の愛情とか管理で変わっていく。そうやっていつも安定してない不安定感があるから安定してないものに自分の愛情をかけて自分ので植え替えしても新しい根を作ったら3年かかる。で変わるのは5年。だから植え替えしても植え替えした今年の仕事は3年5年後に結果が出る。
The time and devotion this process requires is unlike almost any other form of artwork. While the work is almost a form of sculpture, the plants are living things and will always react in their own way.
3年はまあまあで5年になって自分の考えが答えが出てくる。そうやっていつもいつも変わる。その5年後になんでこんな作り方しちゃったのかなっつってそれは植物生きてるから太陽に向いて好き勝手にこう動いちゃうわけよ。そうすると自分の発想と違う動きしちゃう。それともう一回自分の見方をこうやってあこれよろしくないでいつもいつもそうやって変化していく。その結果がすぐ出ないから長生きしないと結果が見えてこない。
The extraordinary time this process takes means that there just aren't that many trees around. Some of the most valuable bonsai are over 800 years old, and so the supply isn't going to increase anytime soon.
ただ盆栽は私で4代のようにやっぱり今種まいて次の人に渡す2代3代かけて作っていかなければできないので、まあ特に国内どんどん今業者減ってきてるので難しい問題だと思いますね。で今ある盆栽はかつて明治の頃山取りされたとか30年40年かけて作った名品が今あるわけ。でも今作られてる名品はあんまりないわけだから今後それが数が増えていくかってことは。
Other factors can contribute to the cost. The bonsai pots and the tools used are often handmade and can cost thousands of dollars themselves. Certain types of tree are also harder to grow or require certain techniques and may fetch a higher price. But more than anything, these trees are works of art, valued for their beauty and the vision of the artist.
作ってる方から言うと年月を考えると皆さんの年収考えたらすごく安い盆栽はねやはり世界に1個しかない同じものが2つとないで年月が何十年かかるそういうことで評価をいただけば高い値段設定もいくでも何十年かけたってそのいいものでなければ評価が低いそういうふうに盆栽の値段の評価はすごくシビアっていうかその値段の評価を認めてくれないと買ってくれないのでいくらね年月かけてもダメだし。
The most distinct aspect of a Japanese bow is the length. At over 2 meters tall, these bows are difficult to handle, and making them is just as challenging. Bow makers file raw bamboo and insert over 100 wedges to curve the bow. Depending on the materials, these bows can cost over $2,000. So how are these bows made? And why are they so expensive? Longbows have been used in Japan for centuries. But today, you'll mostly find them in a martial art called Kyudo.
で、そういうこともなくなり、弓というのは崇高なものであるっていうところから、人と戦わない競技というかものである。自分で自分を見つめることができるものだと思いました。
You can buy a synthetic bow for around $400, but many experienced archers prefer the feel of handmade bamboo bows. Kanjuro Shibata's family has been making bows for over 450 years. It all starts with raw bamboo. Kenjiro tries to obtain most of his bamboo locally, from around Kyoto, but it has to dry for 3 years before it's ready to be used. Kenjiro shaves the dried bamboo down to a thickness of 4 to 5 millimeters. This is one of the most physically demanding parts of the process because the bamboo is dense and fibrous.
マダ系を使います。加工しにくい。だから弓を作る人間には非常に弓や中瀬でありますけども。
A Japanese bow consists of 3 main layers: 2 pieces of bamboo and an inner core called nakauchi. The nakauchi is made out of laminated bamboo and wax tree wood, and it's much harder than the bamboo on the outside.
でその柔軟性に富む材料だけで弓を作りますとよく曲がることは曲がるんですけども元へ戻る力がすごく弱いんです。で柔軟性に欠ける材料と柔軟性に富んだ材料を合わせてそれぞれの長所を生かすためにこういうふうに竹とその木を合わせて作るのが日本の弓なんです。
Kanjuro glues filed bamboo on either side of the nakauchi to form the bow. For some bows, he uses a natural glue called nibe, which is harder to work with, making the final product more expensive than the bows that use synthetic glue. But the hardest part is bending this straight bamboo into the shape of a bow. Kanjuro winds rope around the bamboo and inserts over 100 wedges while bending curves into the bow. Because of the bow's length, this process is extremely tedious. But it must be done quickly before the glue dries. Thanks to decades of practice, it takes Kanjuro around 10 to 15 minutes.
つつことによって、この竹2枚と中落ちという部材3つがぐっとこう締まって、圧着できます。その時点でだいたい弓の良し悪しは決まってしまいます。
Despite the importance of this step, Kanjuro only shapes his bows by eye.
でそれは別に型を当てて全部ここの曲がる R はこれだけっていうのは決まってなくて全部自分とやっぱり頭の中で描いたものをこうしようという描いたものを全部手に伝えてやっていきますんで今縄を巻いてくさびを打っていたくさびを打って作る形っていうのは弓の自分が作りたい弓の形の反対側の曲線を描かされるわけ。その弓の強さと反発力を高めるような仕事。
After the glue dries, Kanjuro removes the wedges and bends the bow into its final shape.
見た目は華奢に見えるんですけども使ってみると手強くて強いだけじゃなくてなんていうかなキレがいいとか反発力が強いとか弓の性能というのはやっぱり軽くてその割に強くてキレがある使ってて気持ちがいい。
Kanjuro's bows cost anywhere from $900 to around $2,200, depending on the materials used. But bows made for display can cost a lot more.
弓一針で値段の一番高いものといえばやっぱり60万70万という意味ありますね。弓の値段としては漆を塗ったりいろいろ加色すればキリがないんですけども。
His family's clients include everyone from local Kyudo practitioners to the imperial family. But Kanjuro wants his bows to be accessible to more people. As long as it doesn't affect the final quality, he tries to make the process as efficient as he can.
僕職人って呼ばれるの好きじゃないんです。なんていうか技術者でありたいと思う。クラフトマンシップってありますよね。私そういう精神量はあんまり好きじゃないんです。この杭一本作るにしても昔だとこれノコギリでゴリゴリゴリゴリこうやって一本の長さにしてたんですけども、今そんなことしません。電動のノコギリ使ったりするとものの1秒もかからんうちにこの長さに切れていきます。でもノコギリで切るとかなり時間かかります。で時間かかってこういうものを作っていくとどうなるかいうと最終的には時間がかかりすぎて自分が作ったものが価格が跳ね上がっていろんな人に特定の人にしか使ってもらえないようなものになってしまうんですね。私がそれが嫌なんで。
Despite the high price, using a well-made bow that feels good is essential for archers.
で自分が弓を買う時の求めて買う時の基準はやはり引き味、しなやかさとかそういう体にマッチしてくるでそういう感じを弾いてみて選んでます。
で非常に作り手の個性を反映するもんなんで自分という作り手を信頼して。
If a single hair is out of place on a high-end calligraphy brush, it must be removed. This intense attention to detail is part of why these brushes can cost over $1,000. You can find a beginner brush for less than $15, but for handmade brushes custom designed for a master calligrapher, artisans spend months turning raw hair into a perfect brush tip. But what makes these brushes unique? And why are they so expensive? Calligraphy is a respected art form in Japan and has been practiced for centuries. But today, there aren't many skilled brush makers left. Yoshiyuki Hata is a third-generation brush maker and has been making calligraphy brushes since he was a teenager.
この筆がね、1本作るのに20年かかって、私が50から作り始めて、今70でちょうど完成したんです。
His family's workshop in Kawajiri focuses on what they call no-compromise craftsmanship. Each brush tip is handmade by a single artisan. But making these brushes isn't easy.
この線が出したい線、それに合う筆を作ることですね。
For a master calligrapher like Daiso Kaneko, small differences in a brush's hardness or ink retention can drastically affect the lines it can produce.
表現したいと思った時に、この微妙な5ミリの差とか長さの差とか、本当に少しの硬さ、柔らかさや、それから毛のバネの強さとか、いろんなことが筆っていうのは一本一本違うので。
The dozens of steps involved in brush making start with selecting the hair. Different types of hair have a big impact on the price of a brush. Yoshiyuki's specialty is one of the priciest, goat hair. This hair was collected 50 years ago from the chest of Yangtze River Delta white goats. Hair from this specific breed of goat is classified as type 3 hair, based on its size, luster, and elasticity. It's a highly sought-after hair for brush making because it's soft yet durable and retains ink well.
初心者いうか、学童さんが使うのはやっぱり硬い筆、馬、タヌキ。だんだん柔らかいのは今の羊毛筆なんかは腕が19歳じゃないと使えないんで。
But today, this type of hair is hard to find in large quantities and can cost thousands of dollars per kilogram. Selecting high-quality hair is done entirely by eye, and it's one of the hardest skills for a new brush maker to learn.
原毛用で言ったら色、艶、耐久性、あと見てこれは10年20年持たないないうなけはそこで一本一本夜時に抜いていくんですよね。
But this long process is just beginning. Once the hairs are chosen, they're boiled and combed to remove any fluff. This process separates straight, long hairs, which are ideal for brush making. One of the most time-consuming steps is aligning all of these hairs. This delicate work is key to making a uniform brush, but it's largely based on experience and instinct.
とにかく自分の目と手でこうやって揃えた分が完成形なんよね、先揃えの。
Throughout the process, brush makers patiently remove any imperfect or damaged hairs.
そうですね、無駄毛あんだけ取ったらもう毛がなくなるんじゃないか言われるんですが、それもこれだけ出る因を頭に置いて設計をするからあれだけ取って取らないと描くのに割れたりとかいい線が出ないからね。もう筆作りを始めたのがやはり工房が遊び場だったんで、ちっちゃい頃からそれはね200パターンぐらいは頭の中にあるんですよね、設計図が。まあやっぱし目と手と勘ですよね。
At this stage, Yoshiyuki's vision for a brush starts to take shape. After trimming, he wets the hair and combines different bundles to create a brush that is dense and durable. Then he dips the hair in funori, an adhesive liquid made from seaweed, to hold the hairs together.
あと書道家の先生だから出た毛が1ミリ2ミリ0コマ何ミリ言われるから、それに工程でも手を抜いたらその筆は僕はダメじゃもし思いますね。魂が入っとらんから。
The finished brush tip is almost unrecognizable from the raw hair. But the precise work isn't over yet. Once the hair dries, Yoshiyuki ties up the ends and burns each one with a hot iron, binding the hairs together. Any mistake here could ruin a month of work. Finally, it's time to assemble the brush. Like the brush tip, each handle is custom made.
軸はやはり軸屋さんいて、これは奈良の私たちみたいな親子でやってる職人さんが、太さが皆先生によって手の筆圧、大きさが違う。
This time-consuming process, along with the materials used, means these brushes can cost 100 times more than a mass-produced brush. The price varies based on the size and type of brush. A larger brush requires more hair, which naturally increases the price. Hata Bunshindo brushes often cost around $1,300, but some brushes can cost a lot more.
僕が作った筆の中で一番高いものは200万ぐらいのものになります。先代が作ったものですと300万ぐらいのものがあります。
Despite the high price, these brushes are essential tools for calligraphers like Daizo. He followed in the footsteps of his father and grandfather and has been practicing calligraphy for 20 years.
だから自分がイメージしているものに筆を合わせてくる場合と、筆で作品がイメージが膨らんでいくというか、これは優しい表現をしたいときは少し柔らかいそういうことを選びますし、きちっとしたものを描きたいときは少し短めのちょっと硬めの筆を選んだりということで、自分に合う筆っていうのを探していくのは非常に楽しいですし。
Some brush makers mix natural and synthetic hair to make brushes more affordable, but Yoshiyuki remains committed to using only the highest quality materials. Kozo, Yoshiyuki's son, will be the workshop's fourth generation brush maker.
やはり父も職人であまり言葉を通して伝えるっていうことはしないしできない人間なので、自分が見て学ぶ、それから作っていったものの結果がいいものになれば父はうなる、よし、それ悪ければもうただひたすら違う。
But like many traditional crafts, the future of brush making is unclear. demand for handmade brushes is in decline. Some brush makers have started selling makeup brushes to bring in new customers. But the main concern for Yoshiyuki and his family is the lack of raw materials.
5代目がこれから出てくるのか、それからその人がやるときにいい原料が果たしてあるのかっていうものが一番懸念してますね。筆業界全体が作る人が減ってきたり、書道業界の人口も減っているので、やはりなるんですが、それは常にずっとこれから僕が職人人生の中で課題にあると思います。
You've probably heard of fugu, the deadly pufferfish delicacy served across Japan. The Japanese eat 10,000 tons of the fish every year, but in high season it could cost you $265 per kilo. So what makes this dish so expensive? This video contains footage of a fish being killed. There are over 120 species of pufferfish. 22 different kinds are approved by the Japanese government for use in restaurants. But one is more prized and more poisonous than the others, torafugu, or tiger pufferfish. Wild torafugu is often found at high-end restaurants, where it's served as a perfectly thinly sliced sashimi, deep-fried, and even used to make hot sake called hirizake. Yamadai has been serving pufferfish for over 100 years. Their fugu is caught in southern Japan and airlifted alive to their Tokyo restaurants. Sourcing the fish can be tricky. In Heidamari Market, the fugu is auctioned off using a bag and hidden hand signals. Each potential buyer puts their hand in the bag and makes their bid secretly before a successful bidder is chosen. When selling such a dangerous food, safety is paramount. In 2018, when a supermarket accidentally sold 5 packets of the fish that hadn't had the poisonous liver removed, the town used its missile alert system to warn residents. The tetrodotoxin found in fugu is more toxic than cyanide, and each year about 20 people are poisoned from badly prepared fish. It takes a lot of skill and training to prepare the fish safely and know which parts are poisonous.
これはエラで、これが心臓、胆の、これが腎臓です。これは肝です。卵巣。目玉。これが食べれない。
The poisonous parts can vary by species, and hybrid species are appearing now that are even harder to tell apart. One of the hardest things to distinguish between can be the female fugu's ovaries, which are extremely toxic, and the male's testicles, which are a delicacy. The Japanese government tightly control who can prepare fugu, and chefs need to take an extensive exam before they're legally allowed to serve the fish. This rigorous regulation means that while the fish can be lethal, far more people die from eating oysters than fugu each year.
フグの試験はまずフグの種類と、あとはフグの種類でも食べられるところが違うとか、食べれないフグとか、そういうのを勉強して、フグのさばくってなると時間があって、もし東京の場合だと20分以内で刺身までで、あとそれと別でフグの種類を当てるっていう、それをやって、合格できれば試験免許がもらえる。
All of the skill and training that goes into preparing this fish increases its price. The fish is killed seconds before preparation, and while the process looks gruesome as the muscles continue to spasm, the fish is technically brain dead.
一回水槽から出して、まだ生きてるので神経抜きいうのをしてから、でまずくちばしを落として、でその後に皮を取って、でそこから内臓とかの処理をして、そこからおろして最終的に刺身になります。
This method of killing the fish means that the meat stays fresh for longer, And at Yamadaya, the fugu is aged for 24 hours before it's served. So what does it actually taste like?
For how transparent it is, I didn't particularly expect it to have such a chewy texture.
It really is much chewier than I expected, but it's really very subtle taste. It's just a really fresh, sort of clean taste and really, really nice.
There's another reason tiger fugu is getting more expensive: overfishing. Tiger pufferfish is near threatened, and in 2005 the Japanese government limited its fishing quotas and seasons. And another popular edible species across Japan, the Chinese pufferfish, has declined in population by 99.9% over the last 45 years. Farmed versions of these fish are much cheaper, and many more affordable chain fugu restaurants are starting to appear. But the farmed version is difficult to raise, and Japanese consumers say it just doesn't taste as good. Wild fugu's high price guarantees that it's safely prepared by an expert chef. And when you're dealing with a potentially deadly fish, that price is reassuringly expensive.
This is a handmade iron kettle. For centuries, artisans have made kettles by pouring molten iron through a small opening in molds like this. Once the iron hardens, they continue the tedious work of hammering the kettle free. It's only used to boil water, but that doesn't make it cheap. You can buy a mass-produced kettle for $20, but a handmade iron kettle can cost over $300. So who makes these kettles? And why are they so expensive? This is Iwate Prefecture in Japan. Iron kettles have been made here for hundreds of years. Each one starts with a sketch. Nobumiya runs Kamasada, a workshop founded by his grandfather.
大体20歳ぐらいから始めてますんで、50年、まだ50年です。
Designing a new kettle takes him 2 to 3 years.
売れるものを作るっていうのは意外と早くできる仕事なんだろうと思いますけども、確かにビジネスですから売れるものを作るっていうのは絶対必要なことなんだけれども、じゃあ自分の木にそぐわないでも見にあんまり綺麗でなくても売れるものを作るかっていうと、それはうちはしないし。
At this workshop, every single kettle is made by hand. But before you start melting iron, you need a mold. The mold is made from 3 parts that form a gap where the iron is poured in.
そうすると、言った通りに外側と内側が間がこの 2.5 ミリから2ミリの隙間になるんですけども、その隙間を、この尻型の穴から流し込んだ液体の鉄が通って、鉄瓶になるという感じですね。
The core is destroyed with each use, but the outer molds are reused 2 to 3 times, depending on the design of the kettle.
それ以上になると明らかに質が目立って悪くなりますので、だから一型から1つしか取れないっていった場合ですと、単純に普通の品物の3倍はするわけですね。
According to Nobu, around 70% of the work is making the mold. This process also creates the most recognizable aspect of the design, this bumpy pattern called arare. This mold has around 2,000 dots, all placed by hand.
僕の場合はだいたい2時間半から3時間で全部押し切ってしまう感じですね。洗いの数が多くなればなるほど基本的には、鉄瓶の値段にはかかってきますね。はい、高くなってきますね。
Artisans coat the core with charcoal dust to make it easier to separate from the iron. Then Shitaro delicately places it inside the outer mold. But he won't know if something went wrong until the iron has cooled. There's a lot of anticipation waiting for the iron to melt. Shitaro has to mentally prepare for the pour. dangerous and physically demanding task. A mistake here could ruin the kettle, so experience and confidence are essential. Once the iron cools, Shotaro finally sees the result of his hard work.
ここが一番ホッとするか、ああ失敗したってなるかっていうのが分かる瞬間でもありますね。できるだけ、無理のない取り出し方をするという感じですね。これが、まあ、多少欠けている部分がありますけど、まあ、ほぼ元通りになったということで、もう一回使いますね。まあまあですね。この中子の取り出しやすさっていうと80点ぐらいですかね。はい、安心ですね、ここでやっと。
Traditional iron kettles like this one don't have any enamel coating inside. Instead, artisans heat the kettle to 900 degrees Celsius on a bed of charcoal. This creates an oxidized layer, which helps prevent rust. Without an enamel coating, the iron subtly changes the taste of boiled water. But this kettle isn't done yet. The final stage is one of the most skill-intensive steps. Nobu heats up the kettle and brushes on lacquer, coating and coloring the outside.
仕上げ着色っていうのは意外とかなりベテランにならないと綺麗な仕上げができないっていうのは温度管理なんですね、これ難しいのは。そういう意味では、まあ、一番最終工程にふさわしく、あとは自分が思い描いてたものがこの着色一つで全然違うものになったりすることもあるんで、まあ、分業の方が効率的であることは分かってるんですけども、どうしても責任の所在が曖昧になったり、作る側が面白くなく作るんですね。で、ものっていうのは面白く作らないといいものはできないっていうのは僕の考え方なんで。
Most kettles from Kamasada cost $300 to $400, but prices can be as high as $2,000. Despite the high price, customers appreciate the slow-paced nature of these kettles. The design is considered wabi-sabi, which is difficult to translate literally, but refers to the concept of appreciating imperfection and practicing mindfulness.
で、僕はデザインするときに決して便利なものっていうのがいいものではないと。っていうのは使って幸せになるものがいいものだと。お金を出してその僕の作った品物を評価して買ってくれるっていうのは、これはとても大事なことだと思います。それから一生使って次の代にも受け渡して自分らの美意識っていうのかな、心とか文化を伝えたいと。
Iron kettles were common in Japan in the 17th and 18th centuries when they were used in tea ceremonies. But they struggled to compete with convenient, mass-produced options after World War II. In recent years, interest in their aesthetic qualities has reignited demand. But that demand has brought on many knockoffs that can be bought for a fraction of the price. These kettles imitate the arare pattern, but usually aren't made in Japan. They also have an enameled interior instead of the bare iron used in the traditional version. But the original, uncoated interior is actually one of the main selling points. customers say they like the taste of water boiled in these kettles. And some also value the small amount of iron content it adds to their water.
鉄瓶で沸かしたお湯がまろやかになること、鉄イオンが溶け込むことで塩素を分解するのでカルキ臭さが抜けて味が美味しくなる、まろやかになる。1世代前2世代前おじいちゃんおばあちゃんの家にあったっていう方の方が多いのが現状です。で今こうやってカフェで見に来ていただいた方は見たことはあるけど使ったことがなかったっていう人の方が多いです。
Despite an increase in popularity, Nobuo says that demand for this type of kettle isn't enough to sustain the business on its own.
私は昔からここは鉄瓶とか茶の湯釜を使って家業なんですけども、やっぱりそのライフスタイルに合った形でデザインして、提案しているっていうのがもちろん古い伝統的なテクニックを使った鉄瓶であるとか、それから茶の湯釜であるとか、そういうものは作り続けて、その技術を伝承しようと思ってそういう仕事もやっております。
Shotaro, Nobuo's son, has trained in making iron kettles and plans on taking over the business to continue this centuries-old craft.
この工場の土間に敷いてある砂っていうのは鋳型を作る材料そのものの砂がもう敷かれてます。で鋳型ができて金属を流し込んだ後型を壊す時にこの土間にまた戻してしまいます。ここの土間は、うちの祖父が創業した100何年前からの砂も混じってるかもしれません。
After these leaves are plucked, dried, and ground, they will turn into the finest matcha. But not all matcha is the same. The greener matcha is, the smoother and more complex its flavour. High-quality jade green matcha can cost 20 times as much as pale green matcha. And while this bright green powder takes a few seconds to dissolve in water, it takes an entire year to grow the plant it comes from. So what makes ceremonial grade matcha so exceptional? And why is it so expensive? Matcha at its highest quality is referred to as ceremonial grade because of the central role it plays in Japanese tea ceremonies. Lower quality matcha, also called culinary grade matcha, can be made sweet with sugar and cream in desserts, but in its tea form, it's very bitter.
お抹茶っていうフレーバーというか、フレーバーとして広がってる部分がすごくあると思うんですけど、実際飲んだことない方の方が大半かなとは。
Jintaro is a 6th generation matcha producer. He runs a 180-year-old tea farm, one of the oldest in Uji, Japan, a city with a centuries-old tea history.
本当にこの2週間で1年間のお茶の味が決まるので、この2週間に全てをかけてやっていますね。
In spring, they sprout young, tender leaves, and that's the sign that matcha season has begun.
新芽の匂いですね。この匂いを嗅ぐと本当にこの季節が来たなと思います。本当に楽しみでもありますし、本当にチャレンジ挑戦でもありますし、本当になんていうかいろんな気持ちが渦巻く2週間ですね。体力的にはすごくしんどいですけど、精神的にはすごく楽しくできているかなと思ってますね。
To make matcha, he only needs the very first leaves of the plant. It's there that there's a higher concentration of nutrients, and they will make the best quality tea.
その旨味が強くて苦味が少ないものを目指して作りたいなと思っていたりするので、それをやっぱり実現するのは、本当にもう触れば折れるほど柔らかいので力は積むのにはいらない。古い葉っぱは逆に引っ張っても取れなかったりする。
At peak harvest, collecting leaves can take hours, but the reason why the plants are in the shade is not to protect those plucking them from the sun, but to protect the plants themselves. Extensive exposure to sunlight develops bitterness in the leaves. Blocking the sunlight preserves their flavour and gives them a bright green colour. Before harvest in the spring, the plants spend 30 to 40 days in the shade. Gintaro uses rice straw panels to shade his plants, a method that's become extremely rare among tea farmers. Most farmers now use plastic nets. They're more convenient and can be reused.
ジメチルスルフィドっていうのりっぽい香りっていうのが、いわゆる覆い香と言われるその覆いをしたお茶から香る香りがあるんですけども、
Gintaro's plants spend double the time in the shade of what is recommended to make matcha, which is 20 days. While plants that make lower grades of matcha are harvested 2 or 3 times a year, ceremonial grade matcha is made from plants that have been plucked only once. After an entire day of picking, Gintaro's work is just getting started.
摘み終わってからも茶の芽はずっと息をし続けているような状態なので、できるだけフレッシュな状態で、蒸して乾燥させるために、そうですね、早い、その日中には絶対やりたいなというところです。昨日作業終わったのは、そうですね、本当に11時半から12時ぐらいで、キロに着いたのは1時前でしたね。どういう蒸しをしたらいいのか、どういう乾燥したらいいのか、やっぱり最初の方の日にちのもの、例えばもう今日なんていうのは本当にちょっと一番気を使うところではあります。
The first step of processing of the leaves is steaming. Steaming locks in the flavour and preserves their bright green colour. But most of all, it prevents oxidation, which would turn them into black tea.
発酵酵素を止めてしまうということ、その緑を維持するという作業になるかなと。ただその蒸しの通し具合で
After steaming, the leaves go into this leaf spreader, a series of 4 mesh tubes where they're rapidly cooled by the wind. This eliminates the water on the leaves and prepares them for the next step, drying. The tea leaves at Gintaro's farm are dried using a 97-year-old furnace, which gives them a unique roasted aroma.
この風合いを守りながら、なるべく自分の理想とするところのいいものができるようにしたいなと思って。
After drying, the stems are removed and the leaves are sorted. Leaves up until this point are called tencha, and they will only become matcha after they're turned into a green powder. But before doing that, Gintaro usually tastes the unrefined leaves. He's very critical of his work.
いい感じ。蒸しは通ってますね。毎回します。やっぱりどういうものができたかっていうのが湯に浸すとすごく香りとかも分かりやすいので、結局乾物の状態でもある程度の香りは分かるんですけど、湯に浸した方がすごく分かりやすい。で、お抹茶になった時にどういう風になるかなっていう想像ができやすいですね。まあ具体的に言うと、色はうちのものにしてはすごくいいなと思ってます。あとは味も、苦味は全然なくて、それはすごくいいんですけど、旨味もなくはない。ただやっぱりなんというか、いつもそうなんですけど、結局理想はすごく高くて毎年って言ってると思います。よく諸先輩方にも共通して同じ気持ちだなって思うのは、本当に一生のうちに満足できるお茶ができるのなんて1回か2回ぐらいと。
Ceremonial grade matcha is ground using a stone mill. It's designed to grind counterclockwise only. This traditional method grinds a fine powder that preserves the nutrients of the leaf, but it's very slow. It takes Gintaro an entire hour to grind just 40 grams of matcha. With an automated crusher, this would happen in seconds. The matcha stone mills are some of the most traditional instruments in Japan. They're made of granite and are entirely hand-carved. Just one of these stone mills can cost over $1,300. It grinds the matcha into a fine, glossy powder. But once matcha is ground, the fragrance slowly disappears and becomes more delicate. So Jintaro usually grinds it one more time before selling it.
いただきます。やはり苦味渋みの少なさと旨味、朝日独特の香りと、あとは東園ならではの最古、日本最古の天茶乾燥炉ならではの少し火を感じるというか香ばしいような香りが入っているのが特徴的かなと思いますね。
Ceremonial grade matcha contains a higher level of an antioxidant called catechin and more chlorophyll than other green teas. This is as a result of the shading process and the slow grinding. While the Japanese public has long been familiar with the distinction between ceremonial grade and culinary grade matcha, it's relatively new to the rest of the world. But matcha's popularity has been soaring. In 2020, the global matcha market was worth $3 billion, and it's expected to exceed $5.5 billion by 2027. In the last 10 years, exports of matcha from Japan have doubled. Compared to 30 years ago, they've quadrupled. But these numbers barely refer to ceremonial grade matcha. The lower costs of production, faster turnaround, and the ability to harvest leaves up to 3 times a year have made culinary grade matcha a more popular choice for farmers. In Uji, only 60 families are left growing ceremonial grade matcha. For Jintaro, taking over the family business wasn't an obvious choice.
お茶についてあんまり深く考えたことがなかったので、もうやりたくないんだよねとか言ってると、なんかそんな素晴らしいことって本当に世界的にも希少だよっていうこと、もう今では本当に仕事というよりも本当に半分なんというか趣味ではないですけど、非常に好きでやっているっていうところがあるかなと思います。
Once all this year's young leaves are picked and ground into matcha powder, Jintaro will spend the fall pruning the trees, ploughing and fertilizing the soil. Come winter, he will weave the rice straw to shade his plants, and new leaves will sprout again, ready to be turned into matcha.
今18年お茶に携わってますけど、理想のお茶っていうのは本当にできてないと思っていますし、ただ多分ずっとそうなのかなとも思っているんですけど、難しいんですけど、僕は本当にお茶が好きでやっているので。
Every year, Gihei Fujara goes into the mountains hunting for this, a Masutake mushroom. If the harvest is low, wholesale Masutake can cost over $500 per kilogram. And over the past 70 years, Japan's harvest has declined by over 95%. Now, the mushroom's future is unclear. So what makes these mushrooms so expensive? And why have they almost disappeared? Matsutake can't exist without trees. They grow connected to the roots of red pine trees in a symbiotic relationship. Matsutake grow in several countries, including China and South Korea, but Japan's fetch the highest price. In 2021, the season's first Matsutake were auctioned off for over $7,000. They're harvested once a year, from around September to November. But because the domestic harvest in Japan has plummeted, the price is volatile. Unlike other prized foods, it's not a problem of overharvesting. It's a problem of changing habitat. Masutake can't be grown on farms. They have to be foraged by hand. But foraging is no easy task. Gihei Fujara has been foraging Matsutake for over 60 years. There's a lot of anticipation leading up to each harvest season.
もう本当に所得はバラバラっていうかね、昨年のように干ばつの時にはね、水をかけたところは出ましたけれども、一昨年は、戻り温度で出ないし、ボコボコですね。
Gihei forages from dawn till dusk, returning home around midday to empty out his baskets. Even for someone with his experience, it can be hard to predict the quality of a harvest.
今年はね、みんな豊作っていうようなことを言ってますけどね、 品物が悪いです。温度が高いためにね、虫が非常に活発して働いておりましてね。
Even with a good harvest, these mushrooms are difficult to find. They blend in with the forest floor and often don't grow at the base of a tree. Knowing where to look is a result of decades of foraging on this mountain.
でどの木が不金木であるかってことはわからないけれどもね、人間が心地よく休めれるそういった場所が一番人間がね、一休みするか気持ちがいいな、ここは風通しが良くてこぼれ日程度しか日は当たらないしって山と山行ってね、好きなことをやって、家族が食べていけるってことは、まだ使えるんじゃないかね。
It's exhausting work, but today Gihei is rewarded, filling several baskets each trip. But his work isn't over when the harvest ends. In the off-season, Gihei goes back to the mountain and tries to cultivate matsutake.
そうですね、山を秋収穫しながら歩いてですね、これはちょっともう少し光線を入れた方が良いという時には枝打ちをするとか、それから芝が厚くなったところは芝かきをするとか。
Gihei also tries to spread the spores of matsutake to help them grow. But cultivating matsutake this way takes around 5 years, and success isn't guaranteed. Even though this year was a big harvest, the long-term trend is in decline. In 1953, Japan harvested around 6,400 metric tons of matsutake, but in 2019, it harvested only 14 metric tons. One of the biggest reasons for this decline is a change in how forests are maintained.
山へ上がって手を入れる人もなくなっちゃった。薪を大体焚かなくなっちゃった。ね、昔はもう薪を焚いてたからもう非常に山を大事にしてたわけ。ところが今薪なんてものは必要ない。山のね落ち葉を全部集めてきたもんで山は自然に痩せちゃったんですよね。でそこで松茸がどんどんと増えて。
Matsutake also grows best with red pine trees that are a few decades old. But over the past century, an invasive pest called pinewood nematode has been hurting the growth of red pine trees throughout Japan. Without the trees, matsutake won't be able to survive. The mushrooms also need ample rainfall and cool temperatures early in the season. All of these factors create a delicate balance for matsutake. Harvests vary widely each year, which causes big changes in price. In 2018, prices were 20 to 50% lower than the year before because of a good harvest. But in 2019, when there was a period of dry weather, prices almost doubled, reaching over $800 per kilogram in some parts of Japan.
不作の時にはもう想像もつかないような値段で売られてるね。ここね、10年、昔よりはもうどんどんと値段は上がってきております。
Today, Japan imports over 90% of its matsutake from places like China and South Korea. In 2019, only around 14 of the 1,000 metric tons consumed were harvested domestically. Imported matsutake are more affordable compared to the ones grown in Japan. But some people consider these mushrooms to be less fresh and not as flavorful. Matsutake with a closed cap are often considered to be the most valuable, but different sizes are used in different types of dishes.
すき焼きはこういう大きい、こういうのは大きいのあれして、網焼きはこのくらいの15センチくらい。こういったあとお寿司はこのくらいの。こちらの土瓶蒸しね。
A full course meal at this inn costs around $130.
やっぱりこうそんなにたくさんね食べれるものじゃないから1年に1回ぐらいこうやって贅沢をしてこのシーズンにね食べるのが一つ私たちとしたら楽しい思い出作りになるかなっていうそんな感じですね。
日本人にとって松茸というのは秋に贅沢ですけど、皆さんが一度でもいいから食べたい。
Due to the declining harvests, Masutake mushrooms were listed as vulnerable in 2020. But the species isn't gone yet.
松を大事にして山を手入れをして松茸のこの分あんまり日が当たったじゃいけないけれどもこぼれ日が入るぐらい。
But if its growth and environment aren't sustained, this legendary mushroom likely won't get cheaper anytime soon. It takes between 1 to 2 months for Hiso Manabe to dye these threads a deep indigo blue. Denim made from these threads will maintain this rich color, and so will Manabe's nails for 3 weeks. That's because Manabe uses real indigo instead of the synthetic dyes most jeans are made with today. A pair of Momotaro jeans dyed with natural indigo can cost over $2,000. But using real indigo is just one element that can raise the price of Japanese denim. Each stage of production requires meticulous attention. So what exactly makes Japanese denim different? And is that enough to make it so expensive? In basic terms, Japanese denim refers to denim made in Japan, but today it often implies selvage denim. The name comes from the way fabric is woven on these old shuttle looms. They weave fabric with a sealed or self-finished edge, hence the name Selv Edge. It means the end of the fabric won't fray or unravel. You'll notice a pair of selvage jeans by the cuff. There's typically a colored line along the outseam. This type of denim is made here in Kojima, Japan.
本当に10代からジーンズはこの町のジーンズを履いてたと。
Momotaro is one of Kojima's most well-known denim brands. But before Momotaro makes denim, it must first dye the threads. The company's most expensive jeans are hand-dyed with natural indigo. Natural indigo comes from the leaves of the Indigofera plant. Dyeing fabric with natural indigo has been a valued art form in Japan for centuries.
単純作業の繰り返しよね。根気がいるのと原料が高い。これはやはりもっと工夫していかなきゃやっぱり量産できないと思う。
Manabe dyes 60 rolls of cotton over several days. He wrings each roll out and hangs it up to dry before dyeing another.
5回でこのぐらい。これは乾くと半分ぐらいの色になっちゃう。
Manabe must dye each roll a total of about 30 times. Otherwise, the color won't be a dark enough blue. Dyeing jeans this way doesn't only take longer, it also costs more. A kilogram of some synthetic indigo can cost between $4 and $5. Depending on the quality, natural indigo might cost 10 times that.
非常に高い。大体我々がその調達するのは1票15万ぐらいするんだね。
That one bale is only enough to dye about 15 pairs of jeans. Although using natural dye raises the cost of production, it has unique effects on jeans that can't be produced by synthetic dyes.
植物には青の染料だけじゃなくて余分な染料もあるんで、少し黄みがかった染料が含まれている。そういったものがやはり微妙に青の色を変化させる。そこにはインディゴでは出せない色がある。
Today, cheaper synthetic dyes have mostly replaced natural ones, so jeans still made with natural dyes are often considered a premium product. Which is partly why Momotaro's Kinten or gold-labeled jeans are worth over $2,000. The increased price of this pair is a nod to the extra effort, skill, and money needed to dye the threads by hand and get the color just right. Not all Japanese denim or Momotaro jeans are made with natural indigo, but even so, the price remains high, around $200 to $300 for a pair like this. And that goes back to the way Japanese denim is woven. Before Toyota made cars, it made looms like this. Originally introduced in the 1920s, these Toyota looms are no longer made today. And although they look and sound like they're working fast, weaving fabric this way takes 5 times longer than weaving on modern projectile looms.
もともと世界で、アメリカで、作られたジーンズもその当時はその機械しかなかった。もう今1世紀経ってもヴィンテージのそのジーンズがやはり、1900年あるいは1920年、ね、あたりのジーンズがいい。でやはり何百万も出して古着を買い集めるわけです。
Despite the looms being automated, an experienced Momotaro technician has to keep a close eye on them as they run. He checks to see each loom is working smoothly and that all the threads are aligned correctly. Even so, it's possible something will go wrong.
直しながら使ってますね。部品は新しく作られていませんので、その部品一つ一つを、古い機械から、外して、使ったり。
On top of weaving slowly, the looms produce fabric less than a yard wide. That's about half the width of non-selvage denim, so producers need more fabric to make a pair of selvage jeans. This is yet another factor that increases the cost of production and ultimately the final price of the jeans. Shuttle looms are also less precise than projectile looms, but variations in the fabric make each yard unique. And ironically, that's what gives these jeans one of their biggest appeals. While most other jeans have a smooth surface, Japanese denim is a little bit rougher.
この凹凸がやはりデニムで一番大切な経年変化の縦落ち、当たり、そういったものに現れている。
While most Momotaro jeans are made on the automated looms, the most expensive gold label jeans are produced with an even slower, more traditional method. By hand with an antique loom. It takes 1 hour for Kazuki Ikeda to weave just 10 centimeters of fabric. While this process raises the price, the extra effort gives the jeans a distinctly different feel.
一番の違いというのはやはりこの肌触り。通常の汎用のものでしたら、ちょっと硬さであったりゴワゴワした感じがするんですけれども、手織りの場合は最初から、柔らかい、質感で履いていただくことができます。
And for denim enthusiasts, traveling from Thailand to Tokyo is worth the trip to buy Momotaro's most expensive pair.
Usually when you brought a new pair of jeans, you feel it's a little bit hard. And you feel like it's a little bit hard to move at first, right? But this one, even from the start, yeah, it feels so comfortable, like you have worn it for some times.
After the fabric is woven by hand or shuttle loom, it heads to the sewing room. According to Heddles, on average, most other types of denim weigh between 11 and 14 ounces, while most denim from Japan weighs 20 ounces. A heavier fabric makes Naomi Takebayashi's job more challenging.
で一番太いのはタコ糸状態の0番はもう本当に太くてとても縫いづらいです。年数で言えば本当に何年縫っても私らも何年縫っても難しいところもありますしね。難しいというか。縫うのはもう全然だけどあれでよかったかなとかいうことはありますね。
Another cornerstone of Japanese denim is the artisanal nature of the way the jeans are finally formed. At Momotaro, all the stitching is done by hand. The same goes for adding each copper rivet. The final look and feel of a finished pair largely depend on Takebayashi's dedication to detail. Because shuttle looms are less precise, the fabric will naturally have several imperfections. But if Momotaro's retail stores find anything wrong with a pair of jeans, they mark it with a small sticker and send it here to the quality control room. Takebayashi sifts through the flagged jeans using a tweezer to repair each marked spot. Momotaro is one of around 40 denim makers in Kojima, considered the birthplace of denim in Japan. While Japanese denim from this city has found a luxury category to call its own, the denim industry hasn't been prominent in Kojima for very long.
世の中、日本中がですね、やっぱり、アメリカに憧れて、東京オリンピック1964年ですかね、それを契機にですね、ガラッとやはり、自由とアメリカというのにすごい憧れが強くなり、音楽も映画もそうですけども、ファッションも、その中でも学生運動でいろんなものが、もう自由奔放にいろんな形が、行われてきた。でその中でやはり1965年、が初めてこの小島というところでジーンズの生産が始まったと。
In the decades since, Japanese denim has reached far outside Japan. Today, it's considered one of the finest types of denim in the world. Sculpting, glazing, and firing are just a few of the labor-intensive steps required to make ceramics. Handmade ceramic dinnerware isn't cheap, but porcelain dinnerware can be even more expensive. The price of porcelain varies, but some dishware, like this plate, can cost over $400. So how are ceramics made? And why is porcelain so expensive? There's a good chance that you sit on porcelain every day. It's the most common material used to make toilets. The reason why is also why it's a popular choice for dishware. Compared to other ceramics, porcelain is more durable and non-porous, so it lasts a long time, and it's easy to clean. It has a distinct white color, and unlike opaque stoneware, some porcelain is translucent. The secret to these differences is in the clay. Clay used for porcelain contains a high percentage of kaolin. This is what makes porcelain white. Kaolin is found all over the world, but large, high-quality deposits are rare.
慶徳鎮とか有田とかその天草の石っていうのはその石自体で磁気化するんで白いんですよね、石が。で他の配合糖土っていうのは焼くとちょっとネズミ色みたいになるんで釉薬で白くしてるんですね。
Porcelain is often referred to as China, which is where it was first created. But today, it's made all over the world. This is the Arita Porcelain Lab in Japan. Artisans young and old have made porcelain here for over 200 years. There are countless recipes for porcelain clay, but in addition to kaolin, they usually contain materials like quartz, feldspar, and ball clay. Each one changes the properties of the clay. Ball clay makes it more malleable, and feldspar helps it become glass-like when fired. The whitest, translucent clays need to be free from impurities, and generally cost more than other ceramic clays. But even for experienced potters, porcelain can be tricky to work with. In order to produce a large number of pieces, this workshop has an artisan for each specific step in the process. Even though 10 people work on each piece, producing new dishware can take over a month.
あまりこの成形をするときに力を入れすぎるとちょっと出来上がったときに薄くなってしまったりとか、逆にあんまりちょっと軽く当てすぎてもちょっとガタガタガタってなって汚くなったりとかしますね。形が出来上がっていくのは面白いですね。
Compared to other ceramics, many porcelain clays are challenging to mold by hand. It's also more prone to cracks when drying. To help with this, and to produce more uniform pieces, this workshop uses molds for complex shapes. Katsumi Yamashita has been working with porcelain for 60 years.
焼き物作りっていうのは勘が働かんと。例えば今接着してるけど、この硬さでいいのか悪いのか、乾燥度合いがどういう状態か。難しいから面白いんですよね。
One of those difficult steps is glazing. Glazing seals the clay, but it also adds color and patterns. And it's one of the reasons that ceramics can be so expensive. At this workshop, each design is delicately painted by hand.
今これやってるのはちょっと作家さんのものなんですけど、その作家さんと相談しながら作り、高いのから安いのまでなんかたくさん特に上絵とかはピンからキリまであるので、もう私が買おうと思って 100g でくださいって言ったら何万もしますよって言われて買えなかったことがあるので、それはもう書いた時間イコール値段ですよね。なのでもう時間がかかればかかるほど値段もそれに合わせて高くなるので。
Another challenge in making porcelain is temperature. In order to achieve that glass-like surface, porcelain is fired at a higher temperature than most other ceramics, usually around 1300 degrees Celsius. At this workshop, pieces are fired 3 times, a lengthy but crucial process. The first firing is done without glaze, at 950 degrees for 2 days. Slow firing ensures that pieces don't break in the kiln. Once they've been fired, artisans apply what's called underglaze. The main firing at 1300 degrees takes 3 days. Loading this kiln is a daunting task, but it has to be done carefully, otherwise pieces could be destroyed inside. Thankfully, this firing was a success. Now, the final design starts to take shape.
焼き上がった商品に今度は上絵付けというのをしていきます。その後800度で焼き付けて完成すると。大きなお皿を一つ作るには大体成形から上絵までで1月半から2ヶ月ぐらいかかりますね。
The price of porcelain varies based on the size and complexity of the design. A simple rice bowl costs around $7, but the most expensive platter from this workshop costs a few $1,000s. This blue and white design is a traditional look for porcelain, but in order to maintain interest in this ancient craft, the Arita Porcelain Lab has tried to create more contemporary designs that fit into a modern home.
もともとの有田焼というのはその日本家屋の中で見ると非常に色彩が合ってるというようなものなんですね。だから私としては今住環境が非常にモダン化されてるんでデザイン自体はすごくいいデザインなんですけど色が合ってないんじゃないかと思いまして、だからやっぱりこれからまた100年200年続けていくには常にやっぱ新しい技法を生み出したりとか新しいことにやっぱチャレンジしていかないと続いていかないと思うんで。
To make sake, you need a lot of rice. Brewers polish rice into pristine, pearl-like grains and combine it with koji mold to craft the perfect flavour. You can buy a bottle of sake for less than $10, but the most expensive version of the highest grade, called Junmai Daiginjo, can cost almost $10,000. Sake requires just 4 ingredients, but without careful attention, the brew can be ruined at any stage. At Nizawa Brewery, Nanami Watanabe observes the entire process. She's one of the youngest brewmasters in Japan.
結局その短大生だったので、就職を決めたタイミングではお酒を飲める年じゃなかったんですね。
Despite her age, her sake has already won several awards.
人によってはその正解がないことにストレスを感じてしまう方もいるとは思うんですけど、やっぱりその美味しいにゴールがないのは私は面白いなと思っています。
We spent a day with Nanami to discover how she brews sake and to learn about what makes Junmai Daiginjo so expensive. It's a quiet morning in the mountain town of Kawasaki in Japan's Miyagi Prefecture. But inside the brewery, the hustle has already begun.
そうですね、朝隊の子たちは割と5時から来て、ただ5時から来たら昼の12時には終わりなので、お酒作りは一人では絶対できないので、私が全部決めていくっていうことも、一つその方向性を決める上では大事だと思うんですけれども、やっぱりその働きがいだったりとかやりがいの部分にもつながってくるので。
例えばご自分のことすごい勉強家だと思いますか？
いえいえ、全然どちらかというと早く帰りたいしできればやっぱりこうなんて言うんでしょう、あんまりいっぱい働きたくないので美味しくするためにはここは手を抜いてはいけない、ここはしっかり毎日やらなきゃいけないっていうこともあるので、勤勉ではないんですけど、やっぱりその目的が割とはっきりしてるかなとは思います。
Sake is categorized by its ingredients and the degree of rice polishing, also referred to as the rice polishing ratio. To be considered Junmai Daiginjo, at least 50% of the grain must be removed through polishing. The more polished the rice, the longer the sake takes to make, and the more expensive the final product. The brewery uses around 12 metric tons of unpolished rice per week. To polish rice, brewers run it through mills that remove the sides of the grain, which contain proteins and fats.
皮の中で石がコロコロくるくる回っていくように、ですから外側が入った時の味わいと中側だけの味わいっていうのが全く違うんです。なので目的の味とするために磨いた方がいいのか磨かない方がいいのか。
Compared to the umami flavor of sake made from less polished rice, more polishing generally means a cleaner taste and a more expensive price point. But before it can be fermented, it has to be washed and steamed.
お米にどのくらい水分を吸わせるかによってお米のその蒸し上がりの硬さが決まってくるんですね。お米の周りについている、お米の粉ですね、ぬかをしっかり落としてあげないと栄養分が多すぎてその目的のお酒にならなかったりとかしてしまうので、結構後味すっきり軽めの仕上がりにしたいので。
Workers move quickly because every moment counts when washing rice.
その時間だったりお米の状態を見ながら水分量を決めていくのは結構大切な工程になります。もともと13分くらいで吸水させるっていう目安をしてたんですけれど、今日の白米の状態から吸水の状態を見て、ちょっと吸うのが早かったので、じゃあ10分くらい10分ちょっとだけども開けようかっていうので今水を流した感じです。
Now it's time to steam the rice that workers washed yesterday.
うちの蔵だと1トンから 1.3 トンくらいの仕込みが多いです。
Steaming takes around 40 to 45 minutes, and just like washing, it requires close attention.
釜ごとにやっぱりこう 水分入る水分だったり、その張り込む順番の下の方だけ水分よく吸う釜だったりとか、その機材の癖みたいなのがやっぱりどうしてもあると思うので、もう少し経つと真ん中からこうバーッと蒸気が抜けて布が膨らんでる状態になるのが見れると思います。
お酒造りは全てがその判断の連続で、だからこその杜氏の腕なんです。
For Iwao, promoting Nanami to brewmaster at a young age wasn't much of a risk.
彼女を22歳の時に杜氏にしようと思ったのかというのは、一番はやっぱり利き酒能力。彼女と僕の利き酒のレベルが一緒だった。これはちょっとショックでした。で、あとは認めなくてはいけないことでした。
Nanami has been working at this brewery for 7 years.
そういう文化があるっていうことも知らないままこう入社を決めてしまったところはあったんですけど、本当に皆さんよく知ってくださって、なんかちょっと言い方合ってるかわからないんですけど、失敗しやすい環境かなとは思います。
It takes roughly 2 kilos of rice to make a 1.8 litre bottle of sake. Many different types of rice can be used, which affect the taste and the price. Niizawa Brewery sources most of its rice locally.
大きく影響します。ただ飲んでこの米だということはわからないんですよね。ちょっと余談なんですけど、よくお酒を飲んでこれはこの米を使ってるなんていうシーンがあるんですが、飲んではわからないです。
While ordinary Junmai Daiginjo sake uses rice polished to at least 50%, Niizawa's most expensive sake is polished to less than 1%.
でもちろん磨いたお米の 99% も、家畜の餌、あと米油の原料、あとおせんべいの原料 100% 使うんですね。なので産廃物が出ないというのがこの日本酒の製造の伝統産業のいいところであります。
Polishing rice to 50% takes around 3 days, but to get to 1%, it takes over 200 days. The process requires more rice and slower, more careful polishing. Niizawa makes around 1,000 bottles of this type of sake each year, and Iwao says they always sell out.
まあ普通お料理でもお酒でもプロなので、だいたい味の想像ってつくんですが、その想像を軽く超えていきます。
But polishing is just the beginning. Once the rice is steamed, it's time to add the most important ingredient: Koji mold spores. Koji is a type of mold that grows on steamed rice. As the spores grow, they convert the starches in the rice into sugars. But workers have to move quickly to maintain the correct temperature and humidity. They feel for warm and cold areas of the rice and move clumps around to keep the temperature even.
繁殖していく人数が増えていくので、発酵熱、熱を持ち始めるんですね。日本酒作りの麹、いい麹を作るには40度から43度くらい、45度までいっちゃうとちょっとあれなので、やっぱり対生き物なので絶対に自分が思った通りにいかないところですかね。その都度その都度のやっぱり気づきと、それに対しての対応力が試される毎日っていうのが、しかもそれが正解かどうかはわからないんです、口に入るまで。っていうのが面白みでもあり、大変さというか難しさでもあるのかなと思っています。失敗をやっぱり笑い話にできるまでが失敗。
Once the koji is ready, Nanami combines everything in large fermentation tanks.
お酒を作る際の原材料は、お米と、お水と、あと菌2種類ですね。麹菌と酵母菌です。 ワインだったりビールだったりとかはその1種類の菌が働き終わってから次の菌が働いたりとかするんですけど、日本酒の場合は2つの菌が同時に、働いてスタートするっていうのが。
Gorgie turns starches into sugars, and the yeast converts those sugars into alcohol. This process is called multiple parallel fermentation. It's what makes sake unique. It's also what makes brewing it so challenging. Nanami monitors this liquid, called mash, every day for a month. There's a lot of anticipation waiting to taste the sake. She takes samples and uses sensors to track the fermentation.
どういうアプローチをするといいのかっていうのをこう経過を見ながら考えて、例えばその濃すぎる数字が出てしまっているもろみに関しては水を少し足してあげた方が酵母が生きやすくなるというか、やっぱり微生物も今になってもやっぱ予想外の動きをしたり逆に助けてもらったりとか、そういうことは結構あります。
After it ferments, the mash is pressed and bottled as sake. But no matter the price of the bottle, Nanami ensures every sip is delicious.
私がその自分で作ったというか、その自分の製品をやっぱりそのどこで飲んでも美味しくあってほしいなっていう気持ちはあって、良いものを作りたいというよりは飲んだ時にやっぱ美味しくあってほしいっていう気持ちが強いので。
For Nanami, training her palate is just as important as honing her brewing skills. After work, she often tastes sake from other breweries.
会社で嗅ぐ匂いだったり会社で利き酒するのはもうなんていうか仕事の側面が結構やっぱり大きいので、割と緊張感を持ってというか、ご飲食店さんだったりとか自宅で飲むのとはやっぱこう違いますね。
Nanami ordered 9 kinds of sake, but she doesn't know which is which.
ちょっと一番最初なので、まずその全体的な香りを見ながら似てるものだったりとか、そういうのをこう仕分けをしながら今口慣らしをしたような感じです。結構人によりけりで飲んじゃこは全部飲むし、お料理を食べながらまた飲んでいったり、あとはお酒の温度が上がってくると感じ方が変わってくるので、それもこう加味しながらなんでしょう、普通に飲んだり食べたりしながら評価をしていって、ちょっとこう甘さが強かったりとかちょっとこう麹の香りが強かったりとか、そういうものが何個か。
Despite sake's legacy in Japan, Nanami says it isn't always a drink of choice for people her age.
すごい好きで飲む子か、逆にもう全然飲まない子か、みんなに飲んでほしいというよりは割とこうなんでしょう、美味しく飲んでほしいって気持ちが強いかもしれないです。苦手な人に無理に飲んでほしいとも思わないですし、美味しいなって思ってもらえる人にやっぱ飲んでほしい。でもそういう人たちってやっぱりこうファンって厳しいじゃないですか。厳しい目線で見て、いやでもやっぱり美味しいよって言ってもらえるのがやっぱり一番の褒め言葉なのかなと思います。
Tasting sake in a restaurant while eating allows Nanami to experience it the same way a customer would.
やっぱりお腹いっぱいになってくるとこうさっきはこう渋いというかちょっと糖分少なめだなって感じてた子たちが割とその軽やかというか口の中の油だったり甘さを流してくれるので評価がこうちょっとずつ上がってきたりとか。
Now it's time to check how many she got right.
ありがとうございます。なるほど。だいたい当たったんですけど1個逆にしました。やっぱりその口当たりの滑らかさというかスムースさみたいなのはやっぱりこう自分の蔵はあるなっていうのをすごく感じました。
勉強に対しての新沢のその投資能力というかが結構高いので、自己研鑽に対してのそのチャレンジに対してすごくそのしやすい環境、しやすい職場だったかなとは思います。
Niizawa Brewery has been around for 150 years. Iwao Niizawa is the fifth generation to run it.
100年、200年、300年続く蔵がたくさんあるので、もちろんいい時ばかりじゃありません。
At the age of 25, Iwao became a brewmaster. He dedicated himself to improving the quality of the sake and the brewery's sales. But in 2011, disaster struck. A magnitude 9 earthquake and the resulting tsunami devastated the northeastern coast of Japan.
結局は蔵は全壊をしまして、自分が住んでいる家もすべて全壊になりました。酒蔵に勤めている蔵人の家族も流されたり、すべてを失った時間でした。外から来てくれた酒蔵はお酒造りをし始めてくれました。その勢いに僕らは乗って、少しずつ元気が湧いてきました。明日、お米をふかすんだよと、お米を磨くんだよ、なんとなく少しずつ前に踏み出せた。
Since rebuilding, Niizawa has won numerous awards for its sake, and Iwao has passed the role of brewmaster to Nanami.
これから利き酒能力が上がる人間と利き酒能力が落ちる人間が同点だった場合、早く判断しなければいけないと。
そうですね、そう思ってもらえたのは素直にありがたいかなと思います。でも社長よりできるようになるかって言われるとちょっと分かんないですね。頑張ります。
This brown paste is the base for the world's most expensive soy sauce, and it won't be ready to sell for another 20 years. While some popular soy sauce brands cost less than bottled water, Gamebishi's 20-year aged soy sauce can reach £99 for only 55 millilitres. It's because of this thick soybean mash called koji. It's the key to this soy sauce's flavour. Here in the city of Higashikagawa, Japan, Gamebishi dries and ages koji with a recipe that's more than 2 centuries old.
で乳酸発酵してでいろんな酸味になったり甘み、うまみ、塩味、苦み、この5つのバランスが醸し出していくっていう。
So what makes this method worth preserving? And why is Gamebishi soy sauce so expensive?
来た時全く醤油の作り方も知らないし、醤油なんて混ぜたらできるだろうみたいな感じたのが全然もう大間違いね。
The complexity of this soy sauce is achieved by fermenting it for days and aging it for years. This traditional recipe allows the company to create flavors that aren't possible in mass-produced soy sauces.
実際僕もこの会社入って初ソセっていうものを舐めた時にすごい衝撃を受けたというか、普通の醤油って結構なんて言うんでしょう。辛いものであったりとかしょっぱいっていう表し方をするんですけど、そうじゃなくてまず酸味がくるんですよね、口の中に。
High quality soy sauce starts with its most basic ingredient, soybeans. This never-ending cloud streams from the machine, steaming soybeans inside.
はじめ朝この中に水が入ってたんですけど、その中の水を全部出すのと冷たいごととあった空気と 今入れてるあったかい蒸気を全部入れ替えるために
It's a seemingly simple first step that can make or break the entire product.
これが冷たい空気が中にある状態で飴を蒸しちゃうと飴自体が蒸し蒸れ出来上がりの醤油の味が変わってくる。
After 18 hours soaking and steaming, the beans should be soft and ready.
蒸し上がりいいと思います。しっかり中まで火が通ってるのでいい麹ができることに期待してます。
To turn steamed soybeans into the one-of-a-kind koji, the beans have to be combined with barley and mold spores. First, Tepe prepares the barley in a dry room dusted with finely ground wheat.
結構機械麹はどちらかというと麦が粗い方。
Unlike other soy sauce breweries, Gamebishi grinds it down to fine powder.
多分こんな感じなんですけど、粗いと、豆に対してのまぶりつきが範囲が狭くなっちゃうので。
Tepe mixes koji mold spores into the ground barley. Then, the steamed soybeans are hand-tossed with the barley and koji powder. The mold produces enzymes that break down the proteins and starches in the beans and barley into amino acids and sugars. It's this natural fermentation process that gives artisanal Japanese soy sauce its dark color and distinct flavor.
機械に一度挑戦したところ、どうしても同じ味が出ないということが、試験的に分かりまして。
Kaori Okada is the current owner of Gamebishi. She's the 18th generation of her family to run this business. Gamebishi is one of the few breweries in the world that still uses the traditional Mushiro Koji method.
むしろの上に麹を並べて、3日3晩熱の番をして作るという方法です。
Workers monitor the temperature of the koji every hour during that time.
今日寝れないじゃないですか。
そうですね。一応明日の明けで、僕は仕事の方終わりなんで。
On the first day, Tepe heats the room to raise the koji's temperature.
上の方なんかは 0.5 度1度ずつぐらいですけど、12時に盛り込んだ時点より、温度が上がってきてます。
The goal in this step is to heat the koji to stimulate fermentation. By day 2, the fermentation should be so active that the koji generates its own heat.
今はもうストーブつけない状態でも、だいたい麹の温度が31とかもう。
As it grows, the koji gets so big it needs to be shaken off the mats, dumped to the floor, and remixed to make sure the beans don't stick to each other.
だから酵素の力が強いと分解力が強いので当然うまい醤になるってことなんですよね。
The koji ages in these barrels where it will transform completely.
一応ここがもろみ蔵になるんですけど、
Moromi is the name of the paste-like mixture that will age into the finished soy sauce. It's a mixture of koji, salt, and water. Adding salt isn't just for flavor. Salt protects the koji from microorganisms and bacteria while it ages in cedarwood barrels.
仕込んだ後はやっぱり塩水と麹をなじますために、頻繁に攪拌は買い入れはしてやるんですけど、
But as it ages, they leave it alone, except for occasional stirring during the hotter months.
夏場はやっぱり表面に酵母っていうのが出てくるので、それは醤油にとってはあまり良くないものになってくるので、夏場は週に3、4回とかする時もあります。 一応これが、先週仕込んだばかりの、麹になります。やっぱり、見てわかるように表面が、黄金色といいますか、黄色いっぽい色をしてます。古くなるとやっぱり酸化して色がついてくるので。
これちなみに今飛び込むと沈みます？それとも全然沈まないですか？こんくらいだと。
じっくり沈んでいくと思います。じんわり。
時からその酵素の力によって大豆のタンパク質が分解されてうまみになり、小麦のでんぷん質が分解されて糖になって。
Kamebishi ages all of its soy sauces. The longer they age, the more complex the flavors, and the more expensive the final product.
私どもは短い年数のものでも2年、長いものだと20年という。
Kamebishi even has plans for a 50-year aged soy sauce, which won't be ready until around 2032.
この中で一番古いもろみはこちらのもろみが、今だいたい41年なってますね。想像してもらいたいのは、バルサミコとかそういう醸造物に似てるんですけど、年数が経てば経つほど酸味が増してきますね。
But before the sauce can be bottled and sold, it first must be pressed. Mature moromi aged under 10 years is spread out on cloth and stacked into layers.
ノートにはこの作業をずっとやること、船かけをノドって言ってますけど。
Then a machine squeezes the soy sauce into a bucket below.
多分800リッターぐらいは今日だけでも絞れると思いますけどね。
But anything aged over 10 years is too dry to press this way.
1本作るのに言ったら1ヶ月以上かかるようなそういう商品です。塩ビのポールに穴を先の方に開けまして、そこにガーゼをします。でそこにこう牛乳瓶みたいな瓶を下につけまして、いわゆるそれでこうバーッとこう押して中に埋めるんですね、瓶を。でその埋められた瓶が、浸透圧によってこうガーゼのところからポタポタって1滴ずつ。
The finished sauce is then heated up to stop the fermentation and to pasteurize it for bottling.
残念ながらもうお醤油は売れない、消費量はかなり低迷しております。
So when she took over from her sister in 2001, Kaori started innovating to bolster the historic company.
まずはその、粉のお醤油、洋食にも使えるようにということで、いわゆる芯を広げましょうということですね。
They even make pizza.
あとナポリからピザ窯を取り寄せまして、ここでピザを皆さんに振る舞うという醤油ピザを振る舞うということもやりましたし。
The company's roots are baked into its name.
亀さんとひしっていうのは、大変めでたい、アイテムですので、昔の多分岡田家の先祖が亀が好きだったというのもありますし、もともとは、4代目までは武士だったんですけれども、5代目の方が、1753年、醤油醸造業を始めたというふうに文献で読みました。なんといってももう日本で 3K と言われてもいいぐらいの、大変過酷な作業です。ですので今の若い人にとってはなかなか続けていくことは難しく、その同族で経営していくっていうことに対してはあまり、深く考えていませんで。
She felt similarly about her own foray into the business.
その16代目の彼から、私が自信がないということを彼に伝えましたところ、それなら閉めたらいいと、幕を閉じましょうということになったんですが、なんとかベストを尽くしてやってみようというところが、姉がいなくなってから、そこから奮起していろんな、資格を取り、勉強をして、今に至っております。
This is one of the rarest steaks in the world. Known as olive wagyu, it costs over $500 a pound, which is almost 60% more expensive than other high-grade cuts of wagyu. Produced by feeding wagyu cows a special feed made from olives, it's one of the most expensive meats you can buy.
食べてみて、今日腹いっぱい牛肉食べても次の日油がさらっとしとる関係以上、またあくる日も牛肉が食べられます。
The technique of feeding olives to wagyu cows was actually only developed in recent decades. And the steak wasn't always this pricey.
以前はね、これ冗談、半分は冗談なんですけど、小豆島で100万以上に売れたらお祝いでいっぱい飲もうというような時代やったんです。牛1頭約120万前後と思われます。
So, what makes olive wagyu different from other wagyu? And why is it so expensive? The sun is rising over Shodoshima in Japan's inland sea. Masaki Ishii has been raising cattle here for half a century.
牛2頭高校から連れて帰りました。卒業証書の代わりに牛をくださいということで。
Shodoshima, literally small bean island, was once famed for its adzuki beans. But after olive trees were introduced from Greece just over a century ago, it became more famous as the home of Japan's oldest olive groves.
小豆島の宝です、オリーブは。オリーブを与えているいうことを私一人が始めとしておりました関係上、動物油と植物油のオレイン酸が融合すればどこにもない香川県らしきおいしい牛肉ができるだろうということから始めました。
Wagyu beef is already known for its intense marbling and high levels of oleic acid, both of which make the meat extra tender and flavorful. Masaki set out to create a wagyu even richer in oleic acid.
でオリーブにはこれ植物油のオレイン酸が多く含まれておりますので、生を持って帰って実際やったところ、牛は見向きもせん。ベロで横にやっても2日経っても3日経っても食べてくれませんでした。干し柿をおばあちゃんが90歳のおばあちゃんが渋柿の皮を剥いて干しているのを見て、これで渋が抜けるんやったら干したらオリーブも抜けるだろう思って乾燥して飼料化しました。
But instead of using fresh olives, Masaki turned to olive pomace, the residue from olive oil production. Doing so allowed him to recycle a waste product from one of Shodoshima's major industries.
オリーブの絞った後で畑へほかしとる近くの人がもう嫌な匂いがするんやというような苦情も聞きまして、これなら利用して完全にで牛が食べて、それで堆肥ができたらオリーブ園へまた戻してあげたら完全にオリーブの一環の循環型農業になるな思って。
Olive pomace still contains a lot of oil. Drying it is a difficult and costly process, one that took Masaki almost 6 years to perfect.
非常に高価な飼料でね、日本一高い飼料なんです。1日3回朝昼晩天日干しで、手で上下かやして乾燥することによってオリーブがカラメル風いうんですかね、香りが。で牛の非常に喜んで食べる指向性のいい香り味になったんです。で持ってきたところ非常に牛が今まで見向きもせん横にのけったものにパクついて食べてくれて、おおやったという感動が今でも忘れません。
Around 2 months before the cattle is shipped out, Masaki starts mixing the dried pomace into their feed every day.
出荷前2ヶ月以上1日あたり100グラム以上オリーブ飼料を食べさせたものがオリーブ牛です。そんなんでもたまたま市場へ出荷したところ1日あたり250グラム与えとった牛が非常に喜ばれて、もうそれを基本にそれでいこういうね まあ、250人2ヶ月以上。
Every morning, Masaki comes in to check on his cows while they're still asleep.
で入って牛が知らん顔してこう練り返しょれんやけど、練り向かいさんと起きてこんようやったらどっかがね起きた途端に、寝ておりますから起きたら、糞尿の出具合。
While other varieties of Wagyu are typically sold to be processed at 24 to 26 months, olive Wagyu doesn't ship out until 30 months. The longer raising time and high cost of the feed make olive Wagyu difficult to come by, but despite the limited supply, it has become especially popular with chefs.
肉質がとてもしっとりと柔らかくて、大変使いやすい牛肉になっています。当レストランのシグニチャーディッシュとして用意させていただいてますのは、オリーブビーフになっております。前菜からメインまで、全ての皿にオリーブビーフを使います。お値段は3万円から3万5千円ぐらいで今のところ計画しています。オリーブビーフなんですけれども、最近は出回る量も少なくなってきました。人気が世界中で上がってきたみたいで、値段も一緒に上がってきている印象があります。
When Masaki first started experimenting with olives, he kept it a secret from his buyers.
私一人で始めてで黙って市場へ出荷しておりましたら、そしたら市場の一番の社長さんに専務が、食べて生肉を食べまして、これ非常においしい牛肉に変わったぞと初めて褒めていただけて、これはいけるなと思いまして。
But in 2010, an outbreak of foot and mouth disease in Miyazaki Prefecture devastated Japan's livestock industry. Despite successful efforts to contain the disease locally, the damage was done. Countries like the United States suspended beef imports from Japan. Disaster struck again with the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami of 2011. As Japan struggled to recover and rebuild its economy, Masaki looked towards strengthening his prefecture's beef production. He led the charge towards working with more local olive farmers. In 2012, other farmers on Shodoshima started following Masaki's methods to raise olive-fed cattle. Just 1 year later, olive Wagyu began shipping to places outside of Shodoshima and Kagawa Prefecture. Today, there are about 2,500 olive-fed cattle on Shodoshima. Still, this is nothing compared to places like Kagoshima or Miyazaki, where high-quality Wagyu production has been taking place for decades. On Masaki's farm, there are just 20 head of cattle.
非常に頭数を増頭するいうてもなかなかできない状態です。最終は3000頭目標ですかね。
To reach this goal, the cattle farmers of Shodoshima need help from the local olive producers.
でオリーブ業界にとってもメリットがある。牛糞を与えたら、オリーブは非常によく育ちます。化学肥料よりも木の勢いが良いらしいです。牛を飼い始めたのは循環型有機農業がしたくて、それで始めました。もう諦めんとこれを絶対ものにしたい、成功させたい、香川家のものにしたいという気力が非常にありました。
After crafting the hand-designed head and customizing the shaft, there's still one step that could make the work on these Honma golf clubs all for nothing. If they make a mistake during assembly, the instant adhesive will immediately dry, meaning countless hours of work and thousands of dollars will be wasted on a single golf club. A full set can retail for more than $50,000. Compared to the estimated $4,400 it would cost to buy a set to match Tiger Woods. So, are the small custom details enough to enhance a golfer's game? And is that why these golf clubs are so expensive? At Honma's factory in Sakata, Japan, there are roughly 200 specialized craftspeople. But the most skilled are called meisho, or Master Craftsman, and there are only 33 with this title. To earn it, a craftsperson has to train for 5 years, then pass an exam. A Meisho has the ability to create nuanced elements of a golf club that can be customized down to the finest details.
性能を出るために坂田工場ではそれは最高の材料を使って最高の設計を行うということになります。それとは別にやっぱり見た目の機能美を充実させる、ラグジュアリーのクラブに仕上げる。
For example, the 5-star model of Honma's Beres clubs includes materials like platinum and 24-karat gold. But before those luxury flourishes are ever added, Honma sets itself apart in its modelling process. All golf clubs are split into 3 main parts: the head, the shaft and the grip. Creating a master model is the first and most important step in producing a club's head. Satoru Hatanaka is using a more traditional material to create the template for a driver. While historically, drivers were made of persimmon wood, today they're made with lightweight carbon and titanium. But at Honma, the model the driver is based on is still made from persimmon. Why? So craftsmen like Satoru, who has been making driver models for 35 years, can sculpt the head of the club by hand.
やはり形状のバランスであったり、やはりこのホーズルからフェースにかけてのつなぎであったり、そういった曲線美がやはり結構難しいですね。手で作ることによってコンピューターでは出ない曲線美を作ってるんで。
The head of an iron needs a different process. Master craftsman Takumi Sato is making the model for a Beres Series 7 iron. When complete, this iron can cost over $1,000 on its own.
まず私たちって本場のクラブっていうのはまず先に目で確かめないけど、実際自分たちで目で見て何回も修正して、この形だったらいい、この形状、この大きさだったらいいっていうのを自分たちで目で確かめられる。
His model will be used to manufacture the final irons, which are crafted from top-of-the-line carbon steel. Satoru and Takumi are able to visualize what the shape of the final club will look like, but they can't see everything. For this, Honma needs to bring in a different kind of expert.
職人がマスターを作った後のそこからデジタル化、データを取る作業と、でそこから CAD に起こす、そして内部の設計を行う。
CAD, or computer-aided design, allows specialists to design the parts of a club that a human cannot see on the outside. CAD creates a 3D scan of the head of the club. Then, specialists will determine the thickness of carbon and titanium needed and run simulations to test the club's integrity.
つけて、でどこにどのくらいの応力が分布するのかっていうのをここで確認します。でこれをすることによって、弱いところ、一番最初に亀裂が入るのはどこかっていうものをあらかじめ見つけることによって。
Meanwhile, in a different part of the Sakata factory, craftspeople create the club's shafts. And while other golf club manufacturers often outsource the shaft, Honma makes every one of theirs in-house.
自社でカーボンシャフトを作ろうよと、一年復帰して坂田工場を作るわけですね。
The shafts of the Beres clubs are designed to recover as quickly as possible to their original shape after swinging. The shaft begins with a strong material called high modulus carbon fibre. This is the highest grade of carbon fibre, often used to make professional racing bicycles. This is cut and wrapped around a metal rod called a mandrel.
円柱に見えますけれども、テーパー部分が変わっている変則テーパーになっている。急激に巻いてしまうと繊維が傷ついて折れてしまうことがあるんで、弾性率の高い、シートを巻く際には徐々にゆっくり、やっぱりこれも人の加減が必要で。
Even at this stage of the process, the handmade elements of design are highly customizable.
シャフトのフレックスを調整するシートにキックポイントを作るシートだったり、素材も厚さ、薄さ、種類もいろいろありまして。
And an expert human eye is required for every last detail, including the paint.
機械では出せない、微妙な色の変化を手作業だとできると思います。はい、これは同じ塗料なんですけども、塗料の引くスピードでこれだけ色が変わります。
Honma invented its very own pull-through method for this step, a unique skill that allows craftspeople to have total control over the outcome of the shaft's appearance.
その同じゴルフセットはセットものなんで、同じ色に合わせないとセットにならないので、引くスピード、一定のスピードで何本も引くのが難しいところですね。
This method isn't all about looks either.
それでやっぱりしごきで塗った方が鼓膜が薄い、機械で塗るより薄いので、そういう重量関係の部分もあるのかなと思います。
Once every last detail of the club is perfected, there is one more step that must be done just right. If the assembly goes wrong, the work of the previous master craftsman could be for nothing.
難しい部分ですが、接着剤を使ってますので、速乾ボンドを使ってますので、間違いがないように、一瞬で形を決めてしまうというところが難しいですね。一瞬で向きを変えるっていうか、これを1日ずっと通してやってますので、集中力を切らさないということが。
When a shaft is complete, it is balanced and tested to make sure that the spine or stiff inner core is set to a 6 o'clock angle on every club. But there's still room for customization up until the very end.
クラブ組み立てると、それなりに組み立てられるんですけれども、少しフラットにしてくださいとか、少しフェースの角度をもうちょっとつけたりとか、そこを刺し方で調整、そんな感じですね。振りやすくしてくださいとか、そんな感じで調整が可能なんで。
To make sure the measurements are exactly right, Honma uses a robotic arm to test out their clubs.
今でちょっと真ん中変でしょ。
基本とでも同じ。
ちょっと真ん中っぽいですね。
Honma Golf started in 1958 as a driving range in Tsurumi, Yokohama. At that time, most of the golf clubs sold in Japan were foreign clubs. In 1982, they started manufacturing their own clubs at the Sakata factory in response to domestic demand.
やはり日本人の体型が平均身長がすごく欧米の平均身長と比べると日本は低いと思うんですね。日本人に合うクラブを作りたいっていうのがそもそもの始まりだったらしいです。
Around 2015, Honma made a push for popularity in the North American market, but the company's clientele in Japan will always have the added advantage of customizing clubs at the Sakata factory, and Japan's pro golfers know it well.
一番喜びっていうのはやはり自分の作ったクラブがプロが使ってそれで優勝したことがやっぱり一番の喜びですね。
This pair of professional hair scissors costs almost $2,200. When it's customized further, it can reach nearly $3,000. Compare that to a standard pair of hair shears that costs under $10. The main reason for this stark difference is a specialized design that ensures the blades don't wear down and can last decades. Artisans spend hours shaping, hammering and adjusting two blades by hand to create shears that rarely need to be sharpened. So how do they create a pair of scissors that stay so sharp for so long? And what makes them so expensive? Hiromi Iida has been a professional hairdresser for 10 years. During this time, she has invested thousands of dollars in high-end hair scissors. But those made by Naruto Scissors in Japan's Hyogo Prefecture stand out.
そうですね、だいたい35万から40万ぐらい一丁で、でもそれなりの価値はしっかりお仕事してくれてるハサミなので、その切り味がいいので、すごく仕事が早くなったのと、で長時間ハサミ持ってても手首を痛めない。
When selecting scissors, professional stylists look for 3 qualities: sharpness, longevity, and ergonomic fit. The scissors need precision to enable various techniques like feathering or blunt cuts, while making the experience comfortable for the stylist, and they shouldn't require frequent maintenance. High-end hair scissor producers like Naruto have solved all 3 problems by ensuring the blades have only one point of contact, the exact location where the user wants to make a cut. When using a standard pair of scissors, the hinge connecting the 2 flat blades can wear down over time, throwing off the alignment. That means the user sometimes has to grind the blades against each other to achieve a clean cut. The consistent metal-to-metal contact wears the blade edge down over time. A damaged edge has to be sharpened more often, thinning the blade further and eventually making the scissors unusable. To avoid this kind of damage, high-end hair scissor producers ensure that the blades only ever touch where they need to make a cut. One way they accomplish this precision is by warping the blades. Constructing blades with the correct warp and twist requires careful shaping. Artisans shape the outer blade at a fixed angle of 45 degrees from the base to the tip. The angle is the same throughout the blade, allowing for consistent cuts without deviation or snagging.
ナルトシザーのハサミは一般的なハサミに比べて1枚の刃の反りとひねりがきつくなっています。刃はこういうふうに重なるというよりはこのような形で極端に言うと重なってるんですね。ですから反りとひねりをきつくすることによって髪の毛を捉えやすく、そして刃と刃がどこでも同じ力で閉じていくと。
As with the entire process of making these scissors, artisans judge when it's ready by eye. After the first round of shaping, the blades are buffed and polished. Then they're ready to be warped. Adjusting the warp requires mathematical precision and undivided attention. The warp is achieved by delicate hammer strikes to the inside of the blade. The high-quality metal Naruto uses, a martensitic special alloy, is strong but elastic, allowing artisans to warp the blades as needed. The curve of each blade is about 0.03 millimeters, small enough to catch a single hair. But artisans don't use any measuring instruments. Instead, they rely solely on experience. Next, the blade is sharpened in increments. In the first round, artisans sharpen the edge to 70% and repeat it 2 or 3 times until the blade reaches its optimal sharpness. But this may alter the warp of the blade, so they must continuously address any defects with careful hammer strikes between rounds of sharpening.
で、もう一度こちらの方で先ほどの反りが変わっていないかを確認し、微調整を今していきます。
Shintaro has been working at Naruto for 19 years, 18 of which he has spent in the adjusting department, working on the warping of the blades. Even with all this experience, Shintaro doesn't view himself as an expert. But his skill in warping the blades directly contributes to the high price of the scissors he produces. In fact, the cost of labor accounts for up to 40% of Naruto's expenses. This is where the mechanism connecting the blades is made. It's a crucial part of the scissors design that also ensures a single contact point while cutting. In Naruto's case, the mechanism is called the three-dimensional circular ride.
中にこのようなベアリングのパッキンを入れて、ハサミの中心部分、ネジの部分で刃と刃が直接触れ合わずに、また滑らかに回転するように構造になっています。これにすることによって中心部分の狂い、減りが少ないので、ハサミの全体のバランスが狂いにくい。それによってハサミが長持ちすると。
When the ride is installed, artisans prepare to test the scissors.
刃先まで一定の力で切れるかどうかという確認。それが終わりましたら、次はウィッグを使って実際の髪の毛を切って切れ味の確認をさせていただいて。
All this meticulous attention pays off, not only in the cutting performance of the scissors, but also in their longevity. Because Naruto's design places less force on the blades, the scissors don't need to be sharpened as often and last longer compared to ordinary scissors.
私も4年ハサミを買っても4年経ちましたけど、1回ぐらいですまだ買って研いでもらったの多分。
Naruto says well-designed scissors last so long that some clients still bring in scissors for maintenance that are decades old.
もう創業当時のハサミもまだメンテナンスに来ることがありますから、ということは50年以上使ってらっしゃるっていう方も中にはいらっしゃる。
But for Hiromi, sharpness and longevity aren't the only reasons professional hair shears are worth the price.
自分の手に合うハサミっていうのをやっぱり選んで仕事しないと、やっぱりこれから長く使っていくので、そこら辺の相性は、買う時にはちょっと決めてっていうか。
Stylists request scissor types and shapes tailored to their specific needs, and ergonomics are paramount. Some producers even adjust the handles to the exact measurements of their clients' hands and their style of cutting. While Naruto's most expensive base model costs around $2,000, Hiromi requested an arabesque pattern which takes longer to design. That brought the price of her scissors to almost $3,000. But there's no shortage of clients willing to pay the price. Naruto sells about 6,000 of its scissors a year, and sales are increasing. In fact, the global market for hair scissors is set to increase at a compound annual growth rate of 5.5% between now and 2030. But the biggest threat to the professional hair shears industry is knockoffs.
当社だけじゃなくて、日本のハサミメーカーさんは外国のハサミ屋さんにコピーされている。来週ちょっと同業者の社長さんたちとミーティングがありますけど、それが一つの問題点でもありますね。
But these fakes don't perform nearly as well as the originals, and producers of professional hair scissors know their buyers appreciate the difference.
コピー商品を騙されて買っちゃった人はすぐ分かると思いますけれども、家計は同じようなものができちゃったとしてもクオリティは真似できないですね。